Good morning, folks. We're ready to start session 2. I told you last week, this is where we get down to the nitty-gritty. We're going to do some planning in our groups.
You want to wait till the red light goes on?
Oh, they told me I was ready to roll.
No, the red light goes on. And there you go.
Green light went on.
Yep, now the red light.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for coming back. This is session number 2. I told you last week we're going to get down to some planning today, and that's just what we're going to do. We're going to go through a quick introduction, recap what we did last week, what we're going to do today. We'll try to get into the groups, address everything as quickly as possible. Some of you, I know you're really pressed for time, and we really appreciate you coming out because this is a community effort, and it's good representation. You guys did a fantastic job last week. What I'm going to do is turn it over to Sarah Burns right now, and she's going to explain what we're going to do day 2, and then she's going to turn it over to Eric Wahlberg, who's going to explain what Manomet did with your maps last week. They did some really cool stuff. But we're going to have all the materials that we had in the first workshop available to start doing the planning for the second workshop. So, Sarah.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Sarah Burns with the Nature Conservancy. We definitely have some new faces today, so we'll just talk briefly about what we did in week 1 and where we're headed for today. So, week 1, we characterized our hazards, and we agreed that we'd talk today and last week about extreme storms, the flood drought cycle, and extreme temperature. And then we went through the infrastructure, societal features, and environmental features of Easton, and we listed out areas that are vulnerable to those hazards, said who owned them, where they're located, and if they're a vulnerability to natural hazards, or if they're a strength, or if they're both. So that's what we've done so far. And today we're going to go back through these same matrices, and for every line we're going to think about action items and what we could do to either address the vulnerability or increase the strength or both for each of those things. We'll do that in our breakout groups, so we have an upstairs room and a downstairs room. If you weren't here last week, you can just pick if you want to go up or down and slot in. We've encouraged people to try and spread themselves among people they don't regularly work with, but we'll just try and get a good even spread between the 2 floors. And then once we've gone through all of this matrix for the 3 features, societal, infrastructure, and environmental, the small groups will prioritize their top 3 or 4 actions. And we will also be talking about if they're high, medium, low priority, and if they're short-term, long-term, or ongoing projects. So the action items should really be projects that you can do. So then we'll pick our top 3 or 4, and then both groups will come back together, and we'll talk about the priority actions that each group highlighted and see how they line up with each other or how they're different from each other. So that's pretty much what we're doing today. If you weren't here last week, when you get to your group, if you have questions about the materials, please do speak up. Andrea was really proactive and got some notes from the fire chief and from Kayla, who was here at the beginning last week but had to leave. We're going to take 1 minute to look at them because many of them might lend themselves to action items. They're just for your consideration. You're not obligated to put any of them into your discussion, but they're just thoughts that we thought this is a good time to share. So the fire chief had some thoughts about trimming and cutting trees around the power lines may contribute to the power company, but there might be some tension there between what residential owners want their trees to look like and what the electric utility might want them to look like. He has a note about localized flooding and a few locations, so we could double check against those. It's Central Street Dam and, Central Street Dam. He also pointed out there's chemical storage in flooding areas around Old Pond and New Pond dams. Downstream of them, thank you. And then to check on the Columbia Gas LNG tank. Fire Station 2 is downstream of Morse Pond, which is a piece of critical infrastructure we might want to think about action items for. He pointed out that the current shelter is not fully handicap accessible. And then he pointed out the new school, which is the Central School, is that right? The school that's being built?
It's not being built, it's
being planned. Okay. Could be an opportunity, thank you. Could be an opportunity to include all the shelter infrastructure you might need, like showers, kitchen, HVAC on the generator. And then the OR school doesn't have proper heat or kitchen facilities and only one shower. So those are sheltering capacity issues you might want to consider today. Then there's some suggestion action items about the wetland bylaws. This came up in our group discussion before we kicked off and separated last week, that the federal definition of a wetland might be changing. So if you wanted to consider revisiting the town's bylaw regulations to make sure that wetlands are protected, and to think about how their buffers might need to change with the increased precipitation we've been talking about. There's another action item suggested about educating the Conservation Commission about wetlands and ecology, and thinking about what the membership might look like for the Conservation Commission into the future. Other action items is to revisit the watering bans that the town imposes in a time of drought and think about whether they're adequate. And there's some details about maybe banning toxic cleaners to protect drinking water, banning pesticides, a couple bans in a row. And then a comment about low-lying flood-prone roads, which the example given was the Lutheran Church on Lexington. It's Lincoln. Okay, thank you. It's on Lincoln. A point about needing solar power maybe for the shelter capacity, and thinking about an education campaign for the Board of Health on how tick and mosquito-borne illnesses are changing and shifting in town. And then enforcing an ATV ban on the national grid lines and the conservation land, and a point that the ATVs increase erosion and might be helping weaken the tree roots. And whoops, I think that we're almost done with this. And then there's some emissions suggestions as well that maybe I won't talk through all of them, but if you're interested in the emissions reductions that were suggested, we could do that in our small groups. But things like solar, water use again, plastic bags, do we have too many street lights, and education about energy use. Oh, and then there's more. So more education about food choices and about how we use our public space, and engaging the general public as sort of a force for change in town. And then, so you've seen this slide already, but I put it back up as an example of what an action item could look like. Action items should be as specific as they possibly can be. Like, you should think of, if I were going to put this in a capital plan or write a grant for it, what are the details that we need to know? And if you don't know all the details, that's okay. But to be thinking really strategically about concrete next steps is what we want out of this, because the action items that we select today are eligible for action grant funding through the state. And the state does have a slight priority for nature-based solutions projects. So if you can think about how your natural infrastructure is working for you and how you might make it work more, that type of grant would get a slight priority, just so you know. And that's all I want to say. Eric's going to talk briefly about the maps, and then we can get to it.
All right. Good morning. Okay, so we took the maps from both groups where you put the dots down, and we digitized that. So now we've got, for each group to work with today, an aggregate map. These are using the same color categories that we used before, the red being infrastructure, green environment, and blue social. So you get now a good overview of the points that were identified by both groups. Now, bear in mind that I think both groups last time identified a pretty large number of issues that were pervasive enough that it wasn't really possible to add individual dots for them. So this isn't the sum total of issues, but these are the ones where people were able to identify particular points. So any questions on that? Okay, and this will be used obviously as a resource as we put together the report on this exercise. One other question that was raised last time on the green infrastructure maps that we showed, and we'll have those available for people to work with, there was a question on the legend, and I just wanted to check with our map maker to make sure I had the right answer before I gave it to you. There are two shades of green on the map. The darker green is the undeveloped, unprotected elements of the green infrastructure network. So if you get into a discussion today where protection of open space is a priority, that map is a really good guide to the areas that are of high value from a natural resource perspective, but are not either developed or protected at this point. There's also a lighter shade of green on that map. That's simply the underlying USGS base map. So it's just the darker green that is sort of your guide to the undeveloped, unprotected, high-value conservation land. All right? Any questions on the mapping? All right, great. All righty.
All right, that's it. And one other thing, those maps will be available. The working maps are actually pinned to the back of that composite map. The one thing I ask you now is to go to the groups that you were with last week so we have some kind of continuity. If you didn't have a group, like Sarah said, you can go to a group by choice. Okay, we're ready? All right, let's plan.
Okay, so folks that were with Bill's group were still in the Mary Connolly room upstairs. Other folks get to sit in these big comfy chairs down here. And either way, just go different shots.
All right, mention 3 color stickers in the red. Today. All right. And Eric, you can move these right into the center.
by climate change. So we project that we're going to get, more heavy rainfall events over time. Obviously, temperatures are going up, so we're getting more extreme temperatures. Also, as part of the climate warming, we're getting a sharper differentiation between wet periods and dry periods. So all of these are issues that are projected to get a bit more problematic going forward. So you bear that in mind in thinking about what our implementation items are. So for this question of basement flooding or high water table, flooding in general, what are your thoughts about what we should be putting on the list in terms of action items? And further planning is fair game. If you've already got a situation where some planning's been done, you need implementation money, that's fair game. So it's kind of everything along that spectrum.
Are we talking mostly about public buildings or people's personal homes?
My personal home.
Yeah,
That's where the conversation started last time.
That's high priority.
It is. No, but as we just unpacked it last time, it really ended up being a pervasive issue that affects both private and public. So, yeah, both. Yeah.
It seems that after we get through discussing it, there's a consensus, and you saw it actually in the additional information this morning, that there are road areas that flood all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the fact that we need culverts. So maybe identifying those areas where the floods occur,
Mm-hmm.
and doing something about improving the culverts.
Yeah, I agree with that, and certainly we've got several places in the matrix where we've identified that as an issue. I think I'd prefer to actually try to flag those in that particular section. Now I get it that those things are interrelated, but I think maybe here if we can really focus on the building flooding issue, since that's what we've called out in this row.
Does anybody have any suggestions about a high water table other than pray for drought?
Well, I mean, certainly, you've got a set of questions with the existing housing stock, existing buildings, and there, a lot can be done from an engineering perspective to try to shore those up, and then you've got building code questions and planning and design elements going forward. So I think both are fair game here, so.
You should look at all your regulations, whether they're conservation regulations for your no-touch zones, building regulations for, elevation above groundwater tables, and your culvert engineering design specification requirements, the minimum standards. Because if they're coming into conservation and saying this is what we're allowed to do, a 10-inch culvert where you think projected you're going to need an 18-inch, you should require that now. So that they're paying for that added upgrade rather than the town over years.
Okay, so it was a good way to capture that review of building codes, regulatory review,
Maybe get a codification of your whole zoning package.
Okay.
And bring them up to climate change requirements.
Okay. Review and revision of development controls, does that capture it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we had talked a little bit about the differentiation between how you deal with the existing housing stock, existing public buildings, and looking forward. Any thoughts on how we deal with the existing problems? Are there particular engineering fixes? Is a study needed to differentiate more vulnerable areas from less? Where do things stand with that?
Some of the stuff that was talked about last week was some of our older roads had swales down the side, and as we started getting into Title V's and everything else, and people upgrading and changing their profile on their properties, we lost a lot of that. Prospect Street was one that came up last week. That road really had swales from the high point all the way down to move a lot of this water.
Gotcha.
So I think that really looking at it like current changes that have happened, what was that impact to bring up the challenge to the level that we're at now?
Yep. So that sounds like maybe Some type of comprehensive review of impacts of recent development, is that? Slide back a little bit so you can see here. I appreciate that. Oh, that was exactly what I did. Now, anybody see it? Sorry. All right, so anything else on that category? Is that pretty good? I mean, we can always loop back if we need to. So next up is dams. So we had a lot of discussion about that topic last time. I think there was some differentiation of higher risk and lower risk structures as part of that conversation. Do people feel like that's pretty well sorted? More work need to be done to make that differentiation? Are you at a point where particular action items are known for particular vulnerable structures?
Well, I think we have an operation, we have it inspected, every 5 years, Stephanie? But what we don't have is we don't know, and correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know how they operate exactly in so much as if we're getting a 3-inch rainstorm, to be going the boards around.
The operation plan probably needs to be revisited.
Yeah.
There is an operational
Right.
plan. It's a question of where is it, how handy is it?
Yeah.
It's probably.
I think
not
at this
on-
point, we probably need to start over from scratch and bring
Yes.
somebody in who has experience doing that with an experienced consultant who can tell us, do an analysis of all our, watersheds
Yeah.
and tell,
I mean, the guys do go out. They get calls, but I couldn't.
we need to be more
remember what
proactive
the
with that. We
plan
need to be,
was, right.
proactive and not reactive.
Right.
But we can't do that without knowing exactly what
Right.
we're doing, how it's
Right,
gonna
and what's
affect
gonna
everything.
happen.
Yeah.
So you had said there's one sensor that's south of or downstream from Easton. but
In
we-
Norton.
So we really don't have anything.
And that would be set up
Coming
as,
into town.
the one I'm referencing is for the United States Geological Service. That's their prerogative to
So
set those.
so we really don't. We're not monitoring that headwater that's coming into town. So
So
is-
we kind of are the headwater. It kind of starts here.
okay.
Okay. So I'm not sure there's any reason for us to monitor what's coming in, and the people who'd be carrying what's going out would be downstream. So I'm not sure. We could set something up at one of the dams just to measure how much discharge is going on, and that might be part of what we're proposing.
Yeah. Well, that
Yeah.
was my thought. Is what how much is coming into town that's going to be coming into those dams?
That's what we have to figure out.
Right.
Right, and that's part of the study that would be undertaken, saying, okay, we have 6,000 acres of wetland is draining through, I'm just saying, for an example, is draining through the New Pond Dam. In summer drought, we can drop the boards. If we're an expensive, 6-inch rainfall or something like that, we gotta put 4 boards up, and, this is the
Right.
amount of discharge we need to limit it.
To move.
But we just don't know that information right now, and that would be something very useful to have.
Yeah.
Right,
Agree.
right. If you could, for note takers, if you can just make sure you get that differentiation, because that's important. So we've got basically an operational component, but now we've also got some planning and analysis work that's been put on the table as a piece of that, so.
I also think some final resolution needs to happen with the Central Street Morse Pond Dam, the high hazard dam. That,
It's a private owned dam.
correct, but, still a vulnerability in the town,
Do you think that can be worked in the context of the planning and analysis we're talking about, or is that sort of a separate category?
It's gonna be a separate issue if it's a privately owned dam.
Okay.
I'm not saying it's not any less important, it's just,
We don't own it.
we don't own it, and we can't just go and tell people what they can and can't do, because then we become liable for it. But that doesn't mean we can't open up discussions with the property owner.
Okay, so just capturing it as discussion with owner of Center Street Dam, is that the correct name?
Central Street.
Central.
You could include that in your,
I've had some conversations.
you could include that in your study of what the potential water
Yeah,
flow is.
well, yes.
That's above the
Could-
dam.
Could we also do
Or
a study on if the dam was to fail, what's the impact to everybody downstream?
No, I think that would be part of
That's-
the overall study that we would do.
Yeah.
You know, just to lump everything in.
Well, at the very least, I think we need to have a better plan in place on what Easton's gonna do if the dam fails.
Yes.
Versus what's the owner gonna do to repair the dam?
Yes.
What's our
That's-
response
yes,
plan?
exactly.
What's our impact? And what
Yes.
can we do to help be ready for that?
Yes.
Gotcha.
Emergency notifications, those kind of things.
Okay. And again, for note takers, that's yet another facet of the planning exercise. So, okay. All right. Great. All right. So culverts, we'd already started talking a little bit about culverts, and some differentiation of, impacts of, recent development. But then I know from our discussion last time, the town is just shot full of old culverts that likely need upgrade.
Greg, has
So-
there been a complete assessment?
That's the first thing we
Yeah.
need is an asset management plan
Yeah.
for all the culverts in town, and we could really use funding to hire a consultant to come in. We would give them all of the known waterway crossings along roadways. They would go out, do an inventory of all the culvert crossings, give us an assessment of, and a rating of which ones need to be fixed, and a priority list on those.
A few years ago, the Taunton River Watershed Alliance, and it might have been the broader organization, but there was a coalition. They had a program where they were asking volunteers, and they trained them to go out and do some assessment of so they'd go out, like, find the culverts and gather certain information. That might be a way to at least know where they all are. And that was done long before GPS, people could.
Well, and actually,
The location
there's
on
been
your
some recent work in that arena, and it's not so much with the on-the-ground reconnaissance, but I think was it Mass Audubon that got some funding for that, or it might have been the Taunton River Watershed Association, I can't remember exactly.
I think it was the Watershed Coalition.
Yeah, but anyway,
Coalition.
they generated a report that was completed within the last year or two. It's a broader area than just the Taunton, I believe, but it does some prioritization. And again, that might be a useful resource here. I'm not saying that it's a substitute for the more fine-grained analysis you need to do locally, but at least it's an input, so just something to be aware of.
So just,
Yep.
Yeah.
there was a suggestion here that we need to maybe look at our zoning bylaws or the state bylaws to see with new development whether the legally mandated culverts are actually big enough for what we want. So
Okay.
yeah, so along those lines, any projects that are coming before the Conservation Commission for installation of a culvert or repair of a culvert, they're holding to the current standard for, like a box culvert or,
It was pretty,
Not
we
being
just
safe.
went through this with the South Street culvert, in that we have to widen the
Right.
existing culvert, we have to match with the existing, we can't narrow it, we have to widen it, we have to provide natural grade bottoms. There's a lot we have to go through now with culvert design in order to bring it into current, rules and regulations, both at mostly at the state level. Massachusetts DEP does an excellent job at, administering what you need to see at the local level. And by matching, usually by matching what the state wants, we usually get everything that, we need at the local level, plus a few caveats here and there.
I
tailored to
think
Easton.
the real question is making sure that when they're sizing those culverts, that they're using current storm data and not outdated data to
But
determine what the.
if
volume
we're
of the-
predicting an increase in floods and extreme storms, then what the state mandates now hasn't necessarily been adjusted for the potential of climate change.
Well, it's the size. So again, they mandate a different type of culvert structure that is, if it's sized properly, will handle better than the old pipes and things. But the question is, what data are they using to determine the maximum flow through the culvert?
Yes.
Well, that comes down from a federal level and from the state level. And that's something that they, in order to keep everybody playing on the same, because that has broad-reaching ramifications. If I design for a 100-year storm, that's typically, I think it's like 6.5, 7 inches of rain in a 24-hour storm. Okay, that's what we have to design for. It's, to all of a sudden bump that up to 8 or 9 inches of rain in a 24-hour storm, it has a lot of impact. They just can't take that lightly. They have to, back. Now, I'm not saying it's not going to happen. I'm just saying they have to. It's not something we can just impose here.
My basement tells me that we've had 200-year storms in the last 25 years, one in 2005 and one in 2010. Mm-hmm. So I think the evidence is pretty strong that we need, that the federal government needs to change its standards.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you.
And that's a big issue. It's well recognized on people that work on sort of the intersection of climate and stormwater management. Unfortunately, not an easy or quick solution.
So however, one of the things that the town can do is, there is updated data. You get the updated data, you could adopt that into your wetlands protection regulations that for addressing stormwater, addressing stream crossings, that that data be used in determining the size of any of your structures that are taking water.
Yeah, I mean, it's also just to take a step back and think bigger picture. Even if you're not in a position where you can update, the standards, the design storms are, to the points that have been discussed here, are behind the times. But even if you can't deal directly with that, certainly you can think about some of the other planning and design issues in town. That's going to influence runoff rates, and that's where some of the nature-based solutions that we've talked about can come into play. So
can I just ask one question?
Sure.
So you have a culvert that's not working correctly or broken or in disrepair. Are you allowed to go in and repair it to the current standard, or the minute you touch it, you have to upgrade?
It's a line between replacement and repair. Okay, if we have a culvert that's something we can go in and fix on our own,
right,
we'll go back and just fix it and get it back in working order.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my question.
Culverts don't typically fail from stormwater perspective.
Right.
They fail from a lot of the culverts in town are field stone masonry, which means they took the old stone slabs and built culverts. It's fine for horse and buggy. But now we have multi-ton vehicles driving over them. If we get a certain piece of equipment that drives over one of these and it shakes a little bit of sand out, eventually they fail from being overlaid. Sure. That's typically where South Street was. We had some failure. The stones came down. Now we can't just go in and fix that. We have to replace that. That's when we have to widen it out.
Okay.
It went from being a 12-foot wide culvert to I think like an 18-foot wide culvert.
Right.
Renovating everything to make it more friendly to wildlife. And that's kind of what we're seeing in town. The problem is this particular job is, we got a grant from the state to do this, but it's costing us $450,000.
Sure.
If we have 100 of these in town and it's going to cost us $500,000 a whack,
right,
we got to prioritize.
Right. Absolutely.
And figure out which ones can we do this, or can we live without this one, or is this something that we, So that's kind of where the asset management comes from. Tell us what we have, tell us what we need, what's in imminent danger of failure. Now, the state does come in and track, there's 8 culverts that they track in town, and they let us know every 5 years how they're doing. It's all the other ones that we have to be aware of.
Right. So. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering if your hands were tied regulatory,
Those 8 are on the primary roads?
No, they're around, there's one on Pequonnoquet, they're all over town. Some of, like Central Street is one of them.
Yeah.
Main Street is considered, I believe it's considered a culvert. They're around, it's just that those are the ones they track, we're responsible for the rest of them. And they're all in decent enough shape that we're not overly concerned about them at this time, but things happen. It's, just because, it's not like it's a car that constantly needs maintenance. I mean, these things do need repair, but it takes some time to form over. So.
All right, great. Okay. So moving on to our next category is the power grid, and we had a lot of discussion last time, mostly in relation to big windstorms and tree damage on the grid. So what are thoughts on action items there?
Well, we talked about cutting more frequently, the National Grid gentleman spoke to going from a 5-year program to a 4-year program.
Right.
And then I know I was one of the people inquiring, as well as other people, as to the methodology of the, having a 2-foot diameter bowl with one branch stuck out the top, and, they keep trimming it every 5. Why not just cut the thing down and cut 20 feet back and leave, and then we're gonna leave more not only leave more nutrients and have better tree management, but we're also gonna not have that impediment for in the case of an emergency vehicle or National Grid having to come in and repair, because you don't have these, as I said, these 2 and 3 foot diameter trunks with one branch on the top. It just seems kind of ridiculous. They spoke to their, I think excuse is a bad word, but I guess their reasoning for that was just kind of a cost. It was cheaper to leave to not remove the entire tree and continue trimming, and that was kind of where he left his explanation. But
yeah, I think he also mentioned that there was some public, I don't know if pushback's the right word, but resistance to doing larger wholesale cutting.
Yes.
So is there a public education component here? Is it continual discussion with National Grid? What do you think the action items are that we try to flag?
The other one was to do a tree planting program in the area of that, but trees that would be less obtrusive to the wiring. Trees that are going to
set back.
they're going to set back, or they're going to crown at a lower height. And that way we do get both, and we satisfy both the public element, and obviously we do need trees for all the benefits that they provide, but we won't have these impediments that we currently have with these large pine trees that are, like Greg spoke, I think it was about, the trees are just reaching their cycle.
Right, yeah. Okay, so it sounds like maybe there's a planning component here, there's perhaps an implementation component. How do we want to capture that? Is it, thoughts?
Who pays for the cutting of the trees? Is it National Grid?
National Grid.
Okay.
Maybe one of the first steps is, because it's a question of who's responsible for what. And certainly the town has an interest in making sure that the branches aren't, or the tree fall isn't taking out the power lines. Maybe it's having a discussion with National Grid about their tree management program. Usually what they do is they just send, here's our annual maintenance program, here's our 5-year program. And the town could, ahead of that meeting, maybe identify where the most vulnerable areas are.
I know the tree warden is in regular contact with National Grid. Whenever the first phone call he usually makes when we get a complaint about a tree, a branch over a wire, is to Grid. They come out, take a look at it, and say, yeah, we'll take care of it, or not.
Yeah.
If we have a problem and the tree is on town property, more often than not, we do take care of it, but the problem is they're on private land, and now we're asking private citizens to go in and take down these trees, and that's kind of where the catch-22 is. We don't have wide right-of-ways in town. They're 40 or 50 feet, which is just enough room for, roads, some sidewalk, and a little offset on the backside. If we can take the tree, we will, but.
Right, the other side of it, which Michael alluded to, is that, so you want to make sure that you have continuity with your power system, delivery system. At the same time, if we're looking at extreme temperatures, shade trees along the streets are a really important benefit to helping reduce that heat island effect. So again, you need to kind of do an assessment of where your greatest risks are and have a plan for managing that. It would be.
You could have, yes, you could have a plan, but you really don't need a plan to say if you take down a tree, you put back a tree.
Well, that's a plan.
That's a decision, that's not a plan.
Well, it is a plan, yeah. That's what planning is.
But, I think the plan part of it is determining what kind of trees you want to put back.
Well, that is part of it, yes, yeah,
And that gets back to what Mike was just saying, that we should be able to, with a little bit of expertise, put trees in that are not going to be as threatening to the power lines as the ones that we have now.
So it sounds like I'm hearing there's a planning component here, a strategy development component, and a
Well,
communications.
you have the strategy, and then you plan to implement your strategy.
And that education back to the resident.
Right.
Okay.
And we also brought up saying going forward with new construction, trying to go underground, it doesn't cause, if you lose on 138, it's certainly not gonna help that subdivision, but it is one less thing going forward.
Yeah. And
It's not to say, hey, retrofit every single wire we can, but going forward, if, a new house gets built over there, there's no reason that, you can't tie into the pole underground, and that's one less thing you gotta worry about.
So in addition to the town's policy through the subdivision rules and regulations, that's already required. It sounds like maybe the town should adopt a policy that new construction, just a single-family home, which doesn't come before any board, it's not regulated other than pretty much through the building department. The potential for exploring a policy that any new home construction look to underground their service.
We respond to a lot of services pulled down from trees, and the grid won't go and help those people. They can't, and the town doesn't do it either because it's a privately owned tree, so we get in the...
And that's, I think that's a great approach, because that's the only way you're going to get most of.
Well, I mentioned not what happened, but so when my house on Bay Road burnt and we built a new one, that was one of the things, was I had a mason lined up. I wanted to take down the rock wall and run the service from the pole underground, and they said no. And I think there was something else that Greg brought up about utilities, about certain regulations not being, forget what it was, but I don't know if it was you, it was somebody else said something specifically. There are certain regulations that don't allow that to happen.
Maybe it was Joe.
I think it was Joe. Yeah, Joe brought it up.
Yeah, because I had wanted to do that. I said, hey, why not?
Well,
The wire runs through the front yard, it's ugly.
That's an action item to explore
they said
a
no.
policy for new housing to have their service connection underground.
Well, ultimately, you would want all houses
So service upgrade or
to have stuff underground.
Right.
So what I would suggest, as you have major renovations of single-family house, just do what they do with Americans with Disability Act. If the
Yes,
amount
over a certain
amount of
amount.
repair you have to put in
Right,
this
right.
system as well, and that would speed it up.
Yeah. In any commercial, and it would apply to commercial development
Yes.
as well.
All right, so we're going to, obviously a lot on this topic, and we're going to need to keep moving. But I've captured this so far as planning strategy and communications, and then exploring undergrounding of utilities. And so, good. All right. Okay, next up was gas infrastructure, and pipeline failure associated, I believe, if I remember correctly, with flooding. So I think this was a fairly narrowly focused issue. Any action items needed on this one?
Did we separate out the big giant gas tank as a potential
those are
issue?
both talked about.
Yeah, that should be discussed again. I think.
Yeah, because we marked it.
Yeah.
So we have the large tank down at 106.
Okay.
Which is what the fire chief's comments
Yeah.
referenced.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry, help me out with what the action item would be there.
I think it's upstream from the dam, so but I don't know how much of an effect a failure of the dam would have in that area. I don't know.
So it sounds like some study of dam failure in relation to that facility is what's
Yeah,
needed.
further to the east,
Yeah.
and it would depend on if that dam breached, how wide.
But yeah, you've got the hill where Target is, so
Right.
that should probably funnel most of that to Highland Street.
Yeah.
But that where the tank is located is a giant wet area. So and I don't know what that topography is right in that area where the tank is and where the pipes are and what that looks like to see if like, because the conversation last week was that with the water fluctuation and the soil moving around the pipes could cause a rupture.
Let's say it sort of meets there coming down, like you said, from that hill, for lack of a better term, from Target, and it sort of meets right kind of in that 60 Eastman area. There's that big wetland system that's there that goes out to Highland. It's sort of like a triangle between 106. So it's sort of both runs down here, and then that goes out to Highland, like behind Highland Variety. The Mansfield end is a big ACDC right there. It's a pretty big wetland system.
Okay.
Goes behind the
It's
tanks.
been there nearly 20 years, I believe, and
More than that.
yeah, and it's been through 2 100-year floods without significant
The
issue.
other issue, though, is if we get some of the predicted climate change, we need to think about tornadoes and increased electrical storms. Tornadoes in particular, we seem to be prone for microbursts and.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so just to keep us moving, I've captured this one as analysis of tank vulnerability. And then next up, we've got septic systems. So thoughts on that? I understand from the discussion last time, you're already in a situation where high water table is problematic. That's likely going to increase as a problem. So what are your thoughts on how to address that one?
Well, you got to do something with it.
Yeah.
This is one of those things that it's not glamorous by any stretch of the imagination, but we're in the process of doing NIPD's permit with the MS4 permitting. We're going to start finding out where our problem spots are in town, and if we're not already hitting them with the current sewer plan, then we need to start addressing them before EPA or DEP comes in here and starts addressing it for us. Which the only other option is to install more sewer in town.
Right.
I know we're going through some growing pains with that right now, but as we become a more developed community, that's where we got to go with it. So
okay, so it sounds like basically a continuation of the process you've already got going. Is that fair?
I think we have to monitor it. I'm not sure about the priority. I think it's a lower priority than some of the other items we have in town, but it's something we have to be aware of.
Especially because, with the comprehensive wastewater management plan, that identified the tier areas, the needs areas, and.
What I'm saying is we might have to come back and, as groundwater, if groundwater becomes an issue, you have to reevaluate the needs area and make sure it's.
What happens now when a private septic system fails?
Depends where it is. If you're in an area, so there's 3 things that happen. If you're in an area of town where we're planning to put sewer in, you can go into agreement with the Board of Health and you can keep pumping the system until we get the sewer installed. If you're out in the middle, if you're on the west side of Bay Road and you don't have any plans of putting sewer in there, you're going to have to go in and get it replaced.
Okay. So here's a suggestion. One of the things that you guys do to mitigate the cost of putting sewage in is allow people to spread it out over X number of years. Is there a way that the town could facilitate individuals putting in a improved septic system?
There, the SRF, I believe that the Board of Health has, we've tapped into the state revolving fund, and you can apply for a low interest loan through that program to repair your system.
So
I believe
that would be something educationally we should let everybody know about that.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
What about on your regulations for new subdivision requiring new technologies?
And someone brought up, I think it was Ed, that the composting toilets that are disallowed, and it just doesn't make sense.
Or even those smart systems, smaller treatment facilities that are created for like condominium, large scale condominium developments. Maybe they could be utilized in new subdivision construction over X amount of units.
Okay, so just to make sure I've captured this, I've got monitoring and planning from the first part of the discussion, education on funding opportunities, and then some look at alternative systems.
Another thing that the town, both through the LEAD program and just through policies, is low flow, and certainly at the state level, I know there are requirements for low flow fixtures.
Okay. All right, good. So just for scheduling here, we are going to try to get through all 3 of these sheets by noon, so we are going to have to pick up the pace just a little bit. It's a great discussion. I don't want to rush anybody. But just
You know that clock's wrong. So.
Remember, it's an hour
Yeah,
off.
that's,
really?
Yeah, they stopped.
It's only 10 o'clock.
It's 10 a.m. You got
I'm glad you said that. Okay, all right. Never
We
mind.
have the time.
I think we should put fixed.
There's
clock.
nothing wrong with picking up the pace, though.
Okay, all right. Okay, so. Go on with the discussion. Okay, so anything else on that before we move on? No? Okay, all right. So stormwater infrastructure is up next. We had a pretty lengthy discussion. Last time on that, we had, in a preliminary sense, identified maintenance, old system, and flooding is an issue.
I think one of the things the town probably should do at this point in time, when the state was pushing back, around 2008, for towns to adopt, stormwater bylaws, or, kind of address more locally what they were trying to advance at the state level. What Easton decided to do was, rather than a bylaw or setting up an enterprise system for stormwater management, was to lower the threshold for projects, when projects required stormwater compliance with the state regulations. I think, personally, I think that was a good step, but it may be...
Explain what lower the threshold means in this context.
So, and I'm not, without the book in front of me, the regulations in front of me, I think the stormwater management, for example, applied to subdivisions at the state level with 5 residential units or more. We lowered that threshold to 3 units or more. So we lowered the threshold for when you had to, had to. I don't think we did anything at the commercial level. And so, when there's redevelopment, I mean, it's expensive. There's a cost to installing current standard stormwater management systems, but the state regulations don't require that you do that with redevelopment, that you do it to the maximum extent practical. And, there are a lot of arguments why it's not. But I think it's probably time to revisit that and maybe come up with something more stringent.
how would an
I
enterprise
don't know how
fund
Greg
work?
feels about that.
We're gonna be doing, we have to look at the bylaws anyway as part of the MS4 permit.
Okay.
So that's gonna be an opportunity to overhaul everything at a local level and make sure it jives with what.
How would an enterprise fund work?
It would work the same as the water enterprise. In I believe some communities have adopted it. I have to admit, I haven't looked and explored how it's working. What
I
you would do is
understand
set up a
paying
commission.
for water.
It's very similar in that you have a stormwater, you have a stormwater management division that's responsible for the care and maintenance of stormwater management. So if a new subdivision comes online, and they want it accepted by the community, it would be part of the stormwater management system. And there's a surcharge that's paid on an annual basis to cover the cost of maintaining that system. It's not a popular option.
There's a lot of ways we can go about
Yeah, I mean, that's
doing
kind
that
of
if
the
we have
short.
the new threshold, the new limits that we have to meet with MS4 are gonna have to come up. We're in the process of, we already meet some of those standards, cleaning out our catch basin twice a year, sweeping the roads. We kind of already do that. There's gonna be other things that we're gonna have to do. I don't think we're at a point, the town of Easton is big enough that it can't handle things on a case-by-case basis. That we need to put in the stormwater enterprise fund or a stormwater tax.
And I'm not necessarily recommending.
No,
I just
I'm
asked how
not.
it worked. I'm not-
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's for, the previous community I worked in I worked for the city of Newton, and they had to put in a stormwater tax, and it was based on the amount of impervious area you had on your property. They have bigger problems. They have a lot bigger problems, in an urban environment. Here in Easton, our issues aren't so big that we won't be able to handle them, on a case-by-case basis and bring it up to town meeting and get it funded that way. Just remember, a lot of the things that they're asking for are for, anytime you say operation and maintenance that comes back to DPW, we're strapped as it is, we can do what we can do, but you know,
Right.
we can always need more assistance.
And when a new subdivision goes in, you require an operations and maintenance plan. The planning board does before they'll approve the project. However, there's no staff to really go out and every year
The
with
best
all
way
the
to,
subdivisions.
the best way to, honestly, I think in Easton, the best way to do that would form an HOA for that particular subdivision and ask them to come in and, you know, put it on their responsibility with their funding dues that they have to show us that the, you know, the infiltration basins and the clean once a year, the catch basins, if it's accepted, we'll take care of those, but, you know, some of the larger items, you know, tree clearings
And
and all
someone
that.
has to follow up, so
Right.
that has to be part of the town's follow-up, that every year, much like licensing, that people are coming in with those reports.
What about old failed stormwater things?
Yeah.
What are we doing to
Detention
take care of
basins.
those?
Well, that's
We
part.
don't do anything.
We don't,
We
and
don't
that's
have the
part of
time,
this on,
energy, manpower. Now, if that's a problem and we want to pursue that, that's something you can come to town meeting, you can say, okay, we need to put 2 more employees in full-time at town for DPW, all the equipment, this is how much more it's gonna cost a year, and for the next 5 years, that's all they're gonna be doing is maintaining the stormwater infrastructure in town. We have a lot of that in town.
so it's more like Greg said, if there's an issue and it's causing a problem, then you try to address it, but
Well, I mean, if we're talking about drinking water and our wells are draining off of the Queesit aquifer and your storm drains in heavy flow are going directly into the Queesit, I think that's a problem.
it is, yeah, and you're right.
So I think something should be done about that.
All right, so far, I've got revisit bylaws, we had some discussion on revolving fund, and then discussion of maintenance issues, we captured that.
Yeah, and I
last issue.
wouldn't, I think bylaws is too specific, I think it's policies,
Yes,
which would include your
policies.
bylaws.
Okay.
Yes.
Revisit policy?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay. All righty, we good? We can always come back if we need to. So up next is emergency shelter. And that was one of the items that showed up in the fire chief's review and his notes. We identified several issues last time that again showed up in the PowerPoint we looked at this morning. So what are the steps forward on that?
Chief, why isn't Southeastern being used? Because the gentleman who was here last week, oh yes, okay, I know, I couldn't remember which organization you were from.
Because we've been using the town building versus
Yeah.
Southeastern. We have a good relationship with the school department. They don't, you know, we use the kitchen facilities, they provide food, they don't charge us for the food. So we kind of have a good relationship there. And although it doesn't meet all our needs, with heat and that kind of stuff.
Well, then we should include here upgrading to meet those needs.
Either upgrade, ideally I would move out of the Homestead Richardson to the high school, and give us more, I mean, because you have to think, worst case scenario, if we have a bad hurricane and a lot of people are out of their homes. I mean, for the most part, we've had 24 people max at one time. If we have 200 people, God forbid, at one time or more, the old Homestead Richardson is barely going to be adequate. You know, we would need a bigger high school, more showers, facilities.
So it sounds like there are a couple of things here. One is possibly upgrading what you've already got in the shorter run, and then there's the longer term question of a new facility. Am I capturing that? Is that?
Yeah, I've asked that they look with the design of the new school, but again, it's an elementary school, so I don't know how that's gonna fit in with showers and that kind of stuff. As far as the kitchen facilities being on heat, and that's not a problem, but.
We should also think about energy independence. Kyla mentioned having a solar system that would work if the grid falls down.
Well, the problem with that, so I'm in the middle of solar projects right now. So the problem with that though is that you have, when you don't have line power, your solar does not work.
It's true. Yeah, mine doesn't either, yeah.
Right, so there is we are talking about some alternatives on that, about battery storage packs with the 40-foot trailers that are full of batteries. So that'll give you line power and you'll be able to isolate it. But that's an option that's out there, and National Grid is actually looking at the capabilities of doing that.
And the option also, an option is to have the school's generator ready, so pipe in just a connection so we could get a portable generator, tie right in.
Okay. Wouldn't you think from a spending perspective though, or not so much a perfect world, wouldn't it be, I'd like to see us concentrated. We're gonna build that new elementary school to it's not gonna cost that much more in terms of engineering or architect fees or any of that type of minutia. And it's not minutia, but you know what I'm saying, to build that in there, to build that generator system in right off the bat.
And even to put the showers in.
Right, to put, not just a few, but for the sake of the conversation, to put in a few more showers into the new school in terms of cost and grants and filing and paperwork and all that. I just think it'd be easier all at one facility. One would think that.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see a new senior center be built and large enough for us to be able to put a couple hundred people in there as a shelter. And then we could utilize the seniors to help us as part of the operation as well. So.
Okay. All right. So I've captured this as upgrade to existing facilities in the shorter run, and then longer term, this question of a new facility. So is that good? Good. Okay.
Should there be discussions with the town in Southeastern for a Plan B to use that school? Because if we're looking at a school that's going to be built, how long is it going to take to build the school? You know, you got a couple of years out. So is a Plan B negotiation, should that be on that list?
We'd be open to that. We have worked well on a bunch of different optional stuff. So if you were in a jam, a phone call would be all it would take to open the door.
Yeah, the Southeast is going to be our emergency dispensing site for the Board of Health site. So we have worked with them on.
So please add Southeastern Regional so that we remember.
I guess you'd have to do a cost analysis. Is it cheaper to upgrade, get rid of RO and upgrade the other, or is it more cost effective to go to the regional?
Right. And then the other option is we don't run a shelter, we send it to a regional shelter, which most people, when I came here was against that we wanted our own shelter because people don't want to leave town to go to a regional shelter is Attleboro and Bridgewater. And people don't want to go. They want to stay in their town. They don't want to leave their house, number one, especially go 3 towns away.
Right. Okay. So I added coordination with Southeast Region to capture. We'll have it in those. All right. So next up, schools, and the issue we identified there was lack of air conditioning. So.
Not just because it's
Air conditioning.
Well, I think the issue is when you retrofit or design a new school, you need to take into account the potential for climate change.
Okay, so this is really forward-looking, thinking about new buildings, or rather than retrofit of existing?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'll just capture that as planning for air conditioning in new schools. All right. Okay, Emergency Operations Center, if I remember correctly, this was largely flagged as a strength, and you guys felt like you were in good shape, so
yes,
that's still a sense of the group.
Although if we do, you're talking about REOCs?
Yeah, the new.
So if we build, or when we build a new public safety building, because one is needed, we would incorporate, a new EOC, but for now we have both Fire Station 3 and DPW.
Okay. Okay, and a new public safety building?
Yeah, that's still a ways off.
Yeah, I got you. But
I mean, these are marginal now because we don't have adequate sleeping facilities. you know, I barely have enough of my personnel as the department grows in my station. So when we're running EOC, we're sleeping on cots in the office space, so.
You sleep?
When we were there for 4 days straight? Yeah.
Okay, so just, when you build a new public safety building, include the EOC there, but with the acknowledgement that's down the road. Okay. Alrighty, road system, I think the general sense last time was that the road network's in pretty good shape from a storm resiliency perspective. Obviously, there's the culvert issue, I think we've already captured that. There was some discussion of the problem of potholes with increasing extreme temperatures. So anything other than that, we in good shape on this one? Any particular action items?
Hey, you wanna give us more money, we can fix more roads, but other than that, I mean, there's not much else we can do for that one.
No, but I think that's an important thing to capture, that the impact of this climate change stuff seems to fall more on your department than on some of the other departments.
Okay.
And maybe it is time that you should get more money.
I want one road fix, 138.
That's it. Yeah, it's not us.
That road beats my trucks up.
That-
My engine travels that road every day, and it is like, I'm gonna take you for a ride on one of my fire
I
engines.
drive that every day.
Yeah, well, drive it in a fire truck. They literally are going 20 miles an hour, sometimes slower through all of that.
There is
because- to an emergency.
The
call.
state is aware of the condition of
Yeah,
the road.
well.
The state is, it's not on the tip yet, but it's in the planning process. To resurface from the Stoughton town line down to
That is terrible.
Belmont Street. We'll
Well,
see. When it happens,
Just
it
to
happens.
Belmont, and you said.
Just want to point out that Southeastern and Route 138 is not pristine either, just.
I am aware of that. I'm
Oh,
sure
yeah.
the state is aware of it.
All right, okay.
I can only interpret them for so much.
Not another town anyhow.
Alrighty, and then we had discussion of lack of mass transit. I don't recall exactly where that discussion went, except I don't have it right now. Is there anything to be done to try to get some better service? Or is that desirable?
I think it was
Yeah,
multiple sided. It was general busing around, but it was also geared toward elderly and stuff like that need to grow.
So it's just exploring sort of that facet of it?
Yeah, we are
Where you
working on
guys
it.
are?
We are
You're already working on it?
Well, yeah, we're reopening discussions with the area transit.
Okay, so continue investigation
Right.
of senior transit, is that?
Well, it would be public transit,
Okay.
which would include seniors.
Oh, okay, so it would be
Yeah.
a broader, but it would serve the senior population
Right.
as well.
Right,
Okay,
I mean,
all right.
I think that's being proposed because it would hopefully help mitigate some of the carbon emissions, because if people had an option for public transit, they wouldn't be as dependent on their own vehicles. And then in emergency situations, if someone needed to get around, there's just, they're reliant on vehicles, and that may or may not be an option.
Could we go back to roads for just a second? Because it's sort of a related issue. We want to make roads more accessible for bike travel and walking.
Right.
So as an alternative, that might be the place to capture it there.
Okay, so, okay, so just before we leave.
And I
mass
think,
transit-
I think it may have come up as an extreme temperature option too for mass transit, just that kind of triggered it, that, again, the more vehicles you have on the road during extreme heat, the worse, you're impacting the air quality even more, so you want to get people off the road. If there are people who are walking or biking to commute or get around, that there's no transit option in those conditions. So again, the only other option would be to get into a car and exacerbate the
Okay,
problem.
all right, so I've got continued discussions on establishing of service under mass transit, and under roads, I'm gonna add, investigate, bike and pedestrian infrastructure, is that?
Continue to advance.
Right.
continue to advance?
Yeah, we have done a study on that.
Okay.
Are you a complete street
We are.
community? You are?
We
Yeah.
are,
Yeah, so you have that requirement in place to provide multimodal accommodations?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to incorporate a study of the roads that he said there's, there's monies that are coming online or that would be online? Is there a way to somehow revamp the current paving project so that we could include and get a cost savings on some of the potential culvert work, or to what Todd was saying about, like Prospect, about the swale? So while we're out there doing the paving, or, there's already some DPW assets and payroll dollars out there, and they're already allocating a study, but could we get a new study that we could, instead of just, and again, it's tough work, and it's a lot of work to do it. You're not just paving, but while you're there, you're also
so
looking at repairing the.
You're looking at two different kind of answers for that one. The answer is yes and no. We have our annual maintenance paving program.
Right.
That's just for maintaining what we have, in so much as we're going to mill and overlay, which is just take off 2 inches, put 2 inches back. If we have to reclamate the road, we'll reclamate the road and put it back. We're kind of strapped with that. That's kind of the limit of that.
Right.
Something like we're planning on doing Depot Street in 4 or 5 years. Okay, that's going to get a complete streets policy, which is going to widen the roadway. It's going to add sidewalks. It's going to make it more pedestrian friendly, more bicycle friendly. We will be upgrading the stormwater infrastructure at that point. It really is on a case-by-case basis.
Right.
We just don't have the funds when we go into a mill and overlay to say, hey, this would be a good opportunity to put in some sort of treatment, treatment swale or something like that at this time.
Right.
Okay, it's not pennies on the dollar like you think it would be.
No,
There's design, when we do mill, when we come up with the pavement program, it's usually 2 or 3 days worth of work. And that's not full-time, that's, okay, 2 or 3 hours here, 2 or 3 hours there, put it together, vet it, okay, it works. If you're gonna do stormwater treatment, you have to go out, you have to survey, you have to do test pits.
Yep.
It's a more of a heavy lift than you think.
Sure.
To design something. And then, with the right-of-ways in town, we often don't have the space, and now you're talking, I'm gonna have to take easements.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to approach the homeowners, I'm gonna have to go to Concom. It's more of a process.
Yeah, no, understood.
Now, that being said, as part of MS4 permit, in years 4 and 5, which is gonna be 2023, 2024, we have to identify sites in town to improve stormwater quality runoff.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing that, and at that time, we will present those projects to the town at town meeting and say, we need to fund this.
No, that's a great explanation.
Yeah, I wish I could snap my fingers and make
Yeah,
it
no,
happen,
yeah, no,
but-
just, yeah. That's,
All right, okay, so next up, we've got housing.
Actually, can I just add something?
Sure.
Now, let's say, just as an example, just to say, if I were to come to your property and come to you and say, listen, I need to cut into your yard, knock down all these trees, install the stormwater runoff in your yard, and we're gonna take an easement, and you can't build anything on the front of your grass, all we're gonna do is grass, or you have this nice lawn. How amenable would you be to that?
Well,
On your own personal property?
we're gonna plant a rain garden there, so it'll look.
Don't say that word, don't.
Could you take all my lawn, please?
Well, see, that's the thing, is that's the case-by-case basis that we're gonna have, is, it sounds great, but then I have to come to you as an individual and say,
Right.
listen, I'm gonna change your property, your way of, the
Yeah.
way you live, at least from a, the
Aesthetic.
aesthetic standpoint.
Yeah.
Thank you.
if it was just grass, like Ed said, you could have all my grass. I got a big fancy stone wall I'm partial to. The rest of it, you're more than welcome to.
But I think it's because around here, we look at it so much different than like if you go up north. Like you go up north and you see these big, huge swales down the
Yeah.
side of the road, and everyone is used to that.
Right.
I think that's that aesthetic part, but that goes back to the education part.
So,
I
and I
think
mean,
the
that's
biggest
just,
concern people would have would be with mosquitoes. that
Right.
They feel it would be a mosquito magnet. And if somehow that could be,
But rain gardens, yeah, that's a good point.
well, not with the rain gardens, I don't think rain gardens, but
Just
with
having
a
that
swale
green
that
swale.
is.
well, as long as it's well-maintained and well-drained, it's not gonna be an issue.
That's right.
But we're gonna get mosquitoes in town anyway, because we have hundreds of acres of wetland, that's under protection, so.
No, I live in Brockton. Mosquitoes are everywhere.
Yes, they are. No, that's what I'm saying. It is.
But That's because
But
they
it's
come
an
over
education
from
park.
Easton.
They do.
Like
They
someone
like
said,
new.
we have mosquitoes because our town's in the middle of a swamp.
Right, yeah.
All right, on that note. Okay, so, housing is up
Yeah.
next. Can somebody who was here last time refresh my memory on what we talked about on housing? I can't recall exactly what the issue was.
I captured to examine regulations related to housing.
Right, but do you remember
But
why?
why?
I got that, I
Why?
got the examined regs up here, but.
Do you have it under extreme, what is it under?
It was under, extreme storms.
Was it the 40B and we said we'd slap it down and run away from it? Maybe. Because I know that was mentioned and we
But
moved
that's-
from that
That's
like,
kind of a red herring, because, I mean.
well, that's why I said it was just written down and
Yeah,
sort of.
yeah, I think if it was a
Swept on it.
concern over 40B, I think that's a red herring. They still have to comply with all the stormwater management regulations.
I have housing stock within areas that flood, high water tables.
Yeah, I think it was
older
the flooded
properties.
basements.
I
and-
think the
Oh, yeah,
conversation
I
started,
think
I
you're
think
right,
it's
I think it did have
yes.
to do with, yeah, I remember that.
and it also circled back to the trailer park.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mobile
home,
mobile home.
Protecting the people in the
Environmental
trailer park,
justice,
that's
yeah.
right.
Right, okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, then that being the case, action items for this one?
I think as far as the mobile home community, it's kind of continuing to watch to see how affected that community is by increased flooding. Right now, are you familiar with the mobile home? I don't know.
I'm just no, we're not allowed to call it a trailer park.
Okay.
It took a long time to get away from that, so we just.
You know, when we have a large storm event and it's declared an emergency, if you can justify or demonstrate that an area continually floods, then, you know, you have the potential for purchasing property and allowing it to, you know, restoring it back to its, which is really what should happen there. However, it doesn't flood to the extent, I mean, I've never heard of it flooding. I don't know what happened in 2005, I wasn't here. In 2010, there wasn't significant flooding like in West Bridgewater. There's a mobile home community that during those big storm events, they had to evacuate people in boats. You know, there were a few feet of water that.
And it's privately owned too, it's not.
Well, it still, you can, again, so I think I think the action item there is to continue to watch and see what the effect is and try to be proactive
So
in.
monitoring changing flood threat?
Yes.
Is that captured?
Yes.
Okay.
Did they have issues in the past with DEP on their failing systems, or was that another community?
They have a treatment facility that was not built correctly, and it's still, and they have inflow and infiltration. They have a very old, inadequate collection system that's made with orange pipe, I guess, which is some kind of treated cardboard. And that's an ongoing issue. And that's an ongoing issue, and that's because it wasn't, you know, they haven't replaced and they haven't constructed, yeah.
One thing that we haven't mentioned, and I guess maybe.
They also have, I'm sorry, Ed,
Yeah, go
can I
ahead.
just, they also have a lot of above-ground storage tanks. They're heating primarily with home heating fuel, and they've had several failures. I think last year was the first year, whole 12 months, they didn't have one in the last 5. And they just had one again, well, that was, I think the septic pump failed. But so they have old waste, above-ground storage tanks too, that again would be a concern in flood.
Okay, all right.
So I think housing, we should probably change that specifically to the mobile home community. And then other residences that would be in threat zones, which that would require identifying those and keeping track of where they exist.
One source of money and in specific areas that we haven't looked at is the Community Preservation Act Committee. One of the things that money can be expended on is to keep elderly people in housing. So I think we need to have the CPA explore some of the uses of funds in those areas related to climate change. It's a study that they
That's a
need to do.
good-
We
yeah.
haven't done a study in a number of years.
Maybe putting emergency generators at those, I know they
Yeah.
have one building on a, that people
That's
go
a
to
good-
get
that's a
warm,
good
but
point, Ed.
if we can tie all the units in, at least heat or,
Right.
and maybe one cooking.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
That would help us a lot because, handling
that's the-
seniors in
yeah,
a
that's-
shelter is
that's-
a challenge.
So that would be the action item.
Okay,
Explore CPA funding to develop plans for addressing impacts of climate change on housing for the elderly.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can capture that in the notes. I'm not gonna be able to get all
Yeah,
that all
yeah.
on the matrix.
Just put down CPA.
Okay, just put CPA on. Okay.
Elderly population.
We're the
One more
happy
thing
people
I-
who
Buy one
get to
box
spend
there.
money.
One more thing I have from last week is see if we can encourage native plantings for resilience, looking at subdivision and zoning, even though they were recently revisited. Does that still feel relevant?
Yeah, you had a slide up there this morning on LID, low impact development. And I think that's definitely something that in our open space plan, we sort of talked around the idea of having zoning regulations that would promote some green infrastructure.
Zoning regulations and education, promoting it among
Yeah.
homeowners.
Or maybe even an incentive to, whatever you might want to give them in exchange for the use of the greener technologies. Like another density, maybe another unit that you would accommodate in exchange for the LIDs or other stormwater management controls.
We haven't, our biggest problem with LIDs isn't getting the developers to do it when we ask for it.
It's not an issue, no.
No,
If you
it's the
ask,
ongoing maintenance
it's-
and concern about how the
Yeah.
systems are going to be maintained.
Yeah, you have to put it in your HOA or other maintenance agreements.
Okay. All right, good. All right, so, next up is waste management, and last time we had identified, some concerns about system function during storm events. Is there an action item associated with that?
Is that a priority item? I mean, is that?
like trash collection?
Yes.
If I remember right from the discussion, it was just that the collection might not happen on a regular basis during a storm event. I think
If
was-
that happens, we just get doubled up. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just, with our
It's
priority
not
is to
like a
get.
big city where 3
Yeah, right.
days of not picking up the trash.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, we do trash pickup once a day, and they do a pretty, I mean, they hustle to get everything picked up.
Gotcha.
You know, the biggest inconvenience is that we, you know, the administrative assistant in my office has to explain to hundreds of people a day that we're 2 days behind, or 1 day behind, or, you know, when their trash is going to be picked up.
Right. Okay.
It is what it is, it's.
Okay, all righty. And then finally, cell towers, and we had flagged system vulnerability during extreme storms. So is there an action item there?
We don't own any.
Yeah, they're all privately owned.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of our emergency equipment on those. So, I mean, we don't have any backups. So if our main repeaters go down, we're looking to switch over to DPW or police and vice versa.
Okay.
So it would be a planning for backups, look, you know, come up with a plan for backups.
Planning for backups, does that make sense?
Emergency communication backup.
Yeah.
Okay.
On to page 2. We have an hour and a half to go, we're fine.
And it took an hour to do this.
Yeah.
Usually
But this is the one we spend the most time on.
Yeah, I think some of the other ones are a little bit shorter, so I think we're in good shape. All righty, so before we leave this sheet, we've got some ranking to do here. So in the priority column, we've got high, medium, and low, so we're gonna need to assign that for each of these. And then under time frame, we've got short-term, long-term, and ongoing. So for each of these, we're gonna need to go through that ranking. So on basement flooding or flooding writ large, high, medium, or low?
Basement flooding,
Yep.
Priority.
medium to low. I mean, Chief, do you
Because it's a
have
function
to-
of something else.
Right.
Do you get emergency calls? I mean, if someone's basement is flooding and I don't mean to pump it out.
No,
first.
they do, yeah.
Yeah, I
they
mean, that's
do.
where what's the demand on the fire department?
But let's look beyond the end of our nose and think about what's gonna happen with climate change and increased numbers of these events.
That is what I'm doing.
Okay.
So
So
how many
I-
calls
I-
are you getting now and, you know, it's one thing to pump someone out. Generally, increased flow, if you can't handle that, they've got a wet basement, are the levels rising? In 2005, at least where I lived, the problem was you had such high water flooding that now you had electrical issues where people
Yeah.
were advised not to enter their basements
Yeah, we-
until the power on the street was
This year we had
cut.
that problem.
So those are the-
Some homes got to that level.
Right, and that's what, so, you know,
So isn't people getting electrocuted a high impact?
that's.
Yeah, but it's not so
I'm
much.
putting it out there, Ed, I'm not arguing one way, I'm putting it out there as.
But how do you, but what's the, like, from a standpoint of how do you, like, what can we do?
Well,
Like,
if we're not taking this as basement flooding and we look at it as flooding in general, is that a big issue in town? We've got, you know, doesn't that subsume the culvert issue and all these other
Or
issues?
where you can't pump, so in the case of 2005, pumping was useless because you're pumping it out of the basement, but it's just
making a
flowing
nice-
right back
you got a
in.
nice
Yeah,
loop
that's the real extreme
Yeah.
storm
Yes.
groundwater that we have. But usually the problem is they don't have power. There's sump pump. Most of the people that have to pump the basins is because they have a sump pump. Power goes out, they lose the sump pump. They call us when it's a foot deep. We go and set up portable gas powered units for our generator. That's usually the case if the power's
Well,
going.
maybe again, that's the solution, is that you educate people that if they're getting a lot of water and we're anticipating a big flood event, that they may wanna consider having a generator that will run their pumps and not
Sounds
just.
like from the discussion, maybe this is a medium then?
Yeah, absolutely, not a low.
I said medium or low. He said-
Okay, and it sounds like this is an ongoing problem,
Yes.
correct?
Stephanie and Ed, yes, it is.
Okay, dams. How medium or
Dams
low?
are, they're medium now only because
Well,
they're generally.
As long as we have a high hazard
high.
dam in town, I
Yeah.
say it's high.
I'm gonna say it's
We
between.
have several.
Oh.
A scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest and 1 being, one being the lowest, I'd say it's a 4, 4.5.
Well, I say it's a 5, because when it does fail, all those people are gonna wanna know why the town of Easton,
That's-
although it's a private dam,
That's
why
true.
the town of Easton didn't take care of this and why we have all this damage and, God forbid, injuries or.
Can't really argue
I
with that.
think high is probably a good choice there.
Alrighty.
And
I don't know why, who has the authority to take any kind of legal action against this private owner to repair this dam?
This.
Think back when the city of Taunton had the private dam
Yeah.
issue,
Yeah.
how much money it cost them to handle that when it was failing over 4 days.
Yeah, and it's a discussion for another day, but the owner is not taking any responsibility.
Correct. So,
There's
you know where the fingers are gonna be pointing when it
I
fails.
understand, believe
It
me.
does.
There's public nuisance law, which the selectmen are loath to use, but that might be something, if you're desperate enough, that you want to look at.
And I can't tell you what's wrong with it, why is it considered a high hazard dam, what the
It hasn't
problem
been
is.
maintained.
Can it be an easy repair? I mean, have we looked at that?
Has the
There's
state
been
inspected
assessment
it?
done, which is why.
I believe I hope they're coming in
What
more
was the last
frequently than
inspection?
5
Yeah,
years.
I'm not
but-
sure.
we don't need to get bogged down in
Yeah.
this particular, it is an issue, and we should revisit it again. I mean,
Yep.
it comes up, and it just came up again recently, and again, the owner they want the town to take it over and pay for it. And that's
It
what
sounds
they
like
want.
this is ongoing, correct?
Yes.
All right, so we've got high and ongoing on that
It's,
one.
the Morris Pond dam.
All right, actually, I should probably write that, because, do we have Morris Pond Dam? Get that name up here.
And then all the other dams, and all I was saying is that right now they're in generally good repair, the ones the town owns. That's the one private one that is in disrepair. The others are on a schedule and we need to continue to maintain that.
All right,
I
so
know Greg said so.
moving on to culverts. Priority level for culverts.
The operation is the high.
I think it's a higher priority. It's right up there with dams, right in the same category.
Yeah.
All right, okay, all right. And ongoing, correct? Or-
Yep.
All right. Power grid?
You know, if I look at it, the power grid, the issue is, what are the key life-sustaining or life-threatening issues with losing the power grid? It's not convenience. It's not that people might have to live without power for a few days. It's that you know, who is at risk of loss of life as a result of being without power? What is the impact on our emergency response if there's loss of power? Is there adequate supply for the emergency response to whatever the situation is? It's, you know, I think you need to be careful that it's not a matter of comfort, it's a matter of life, health, well-being. So what are the...
I agree with you, and the gentleman from the power company told us that they have a list of people that are, you know, on ventilators and things like that. But he also told us that we don't necessarily share that with anybody because of privacy rules. So
We have some people that we know are on system. We have a list of critical infrastructure that we
And you
go
know
by
where
when we
the
tell.
vulnerable populations are, like the nursing, we talked about this a couple of years ago, nursing homes, or where the elderly and people with disabilities are congregated.
That we reach out to.
But I mean, to me, the first priority is to make sure the emergency response units have power. And then, you know, everybody, it's kind of like you're on a plane, you know, the adult puts on the oxygen mask first to help everyone else who's vulnerable.
All right, so where does that leave us then in terms of the ranking? Are we leaning towards high on this, or is it more medium? What?
I think it's high. You just need to know that you're not trying to make sure that everybody can watch TV.
Right.
I think it's high also.
Okay.
And it varies with the season, because there are a lot of
That's
people
right.
with electric heating that are gonna freeze
That's
to
right,
death.
that's not a comfort thing, that could be a life or death.
Okay. All right, so high, and then sounds like ongoing, correct? All right. Moving on to gas infrastructure, ranking there. We talked about both system vulnerability and storage tank.
And I think the system vulnerability, I think what Joe said was water getting into the lines.
Right, into the lines.
If you had a breach in the lines, that really will throw it out.
Right.
And then the water, the tank is its own.
With these other things, we've had problems already. We've had the 200-year floods, and we haven't had any problem with the gas infrastructure, so I don't think I'd rate it as high, maybe medium.
Yeah. Are we talking specifically about the tank in that
Well,
location
we
only?
We added the tank as part of the discussion
Alright, so you're
today.
talking about the gas infrastructure?
We're talking about both.
It's medium to high.
Yeah.
The gas infrastructure needs to be, there's a lot of repair work that needs to happen. I can't speak to specifics, but it's old, and they've identified it themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. They
It
said that.
needs upgrading, and we're all paying more rates because of that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I would imagine wherever there's a leak, there's a potential, and there seems to be, I know, again, the city of Brockton, they've been replacing line for several years.
It sounds like you're leaning towards high on this one.
Yeah, I guess you have to. There's high-pressure systems and low-pressure systems, and that's what happened up in Merrimack Valley. They were switching over and over-pressurized the system.
combination.
It's a combination, yeah.
That's what he said, yeah.
Yeah.
The problem with that is, what was it, maybe a year and a half ago on conservation, I was the only nay. We don't want to allow any expansion of the gas network. Like, we're undersized to what the chief said. The reason the price goes up, we're undersized. We can't get delivery to meet the demand. And in order to do that, you have to have a larger pipe, which they do want to put in, but most towns signed a moratorium against it. So it's kind of like we voted against ourselves. Like, it's critical infrastructure and it has to be done, but we said as a board, and again, I was the dissenting nay, we voted against it. So, just something to be aware of.
Okay. Sounds like this is ongoing as well, correct? All right, okay. So moving on to septic systems.
High or medium.
Well, we're not going to get anywhere if everything is a high priority.
Yeah, I mean, that is a valid point. We do need to think about some differentiation, so.
The ones we've talked about so far are sort of safety issues.
Yeah.
So maybe the septic system should be medium and ongoing.
Yeah. When one fails, it's like isolated to
Yeah.
that
Right, to a
location.
small area.
It's not a huge impact.
All right. Fair enough. All right, stormwater infrastructure?
Well, that's a result, the management of that is a result of other flooding and other issues, so I would think it would be a higher priority.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, good with that?
HO.
Okay.
Do we have any nice short-term issues we could just take care of?
All right, so moving on next to the shelter issue.
I think that's more of a lower priority than the other ones,
Yeah.
in so much that we have a system in place, we have a backup to that.
Right, then you can make it work.
Right,
Yeah.
we can, with some future planning, we can improve upon what we have, but what we have is.
Okay.
Right, you also listed it as a strength too, so.
Right.
All right.
I think
And ongoing, school system?
Well, no, wait a second.
Yeah.
We can solve that shelter problem.
Right, so
In a-
that'd be short.
I'd say either short or
Oh, okay.
long term, because it's not gonna last forever.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Okay. Schools?
It's low price, same thing,
Yes,
right.
low priority, and, schools are always gonna be ongoing. I
Right.
don't see how we don't not make that, but it's
And I
low
think some
priority.
of what people talked about was, if kids can't go to, you have longer years because you have snow events or storms, and they're going to school in the heat of the summer, air conditioning, that type of thing, and if kids can't go to school, there's an impact on parents, and,
Right.
but still, that's not necessarily a safety issue, it's
Right.
not a life and limb issue.
So we're low and
Low.
ongoing
I
on
think
this?
the low and it's ongoing.
Okay.
Well,
I will say,
could we, how about long term? Because
Right.
if you air condition the schools, then you don't have a problem anymore. Whereas if you take care of the problems that are ongoing, it's still gonna rain and we're still gonna get floods, et cetera, et cetera. You'll never solve them completely, but this one you can. So I'd say long term, it's a long term planning thing. When you build a new school building, do
Plan
this.
for it.
Yeah.
Right.
So one of the things the state has passed this year, and we're actually doing it tomorrow as a test, is at-home class because of the internet.
Oh.
So the kids log in, because most of the schools now use the Google platform.
Mm-hmm.
The students will log in at 8 o'clock and they have to go through their classes online till, say, 1 o'clock, so they get credit for that snow day.
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, it's on Tuesday.
Yeah.
that's pretty simple for the parents, though.
And a lot of the schools are trying that because of that reason of carrying over into the summertime.
I'll let you know how it goes, Nathan's doing.
Yeah. So they're doing it here in Easton too?
Well, Nathan's going to Southeastern.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
Southeastern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Doing
Usually
that
they're not doing it in
tomorrow?
high school.
Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday, I thought you were
I'll
gonna
let
make
you
them
know
do it
how
on
it
the
goes.
weekend.
Yeah, no, it's on Tuesday.
They'll be at
Yeah,
home.
so they had a scheduled half-day.
Yeah.
So instead of having the students come to school, they're gonna do it at home.
Nice.
But all the staff will be at the school monitoring
Right.
everyone's Chromebook and how the process is going.
Good.
Interesting. All right, so next up is the Emergency Operations Center.
It was listed as a strength, so.
Yeah.
It's low priority.
Yes, it's
If
low.
we hadn't rehabbed the DPW and improved it, I would have said it was more medium to hot, but it's, chief, I think it's low
Yeah,
right now.
low, ongoing.
Well, would you list it as ongoing, or would you list it as a long-term plan to keep improving?
Yeah, long-term, either way.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Because for me, ongoing means you're gonna keep on doing maintenance to fix something, but this would be, as the town grows, periodically you're going to either upgrade
Yeah,
or
no, long
something
term.
like that.
Okay. All right, roads.
Well, we know it's ongoing.
Yep. Right, but it's what we listed that as a strength too. Because they're in pretty good shape and you have a plan.
Yeah, how about medium?
Medium.
We'll blame the state because of 138.
Medium for all the town roads.
Yeah.
Lack of mass transit.
Well, the problem is we've lived without it for so long that,
Low.
yeah, I'd say it's low.
Low and ongoing.
Be something we'd like to solve, but it's,
And I don't think it's ongoing. I think that could be a mid to long term.
okay, good.
Okay.
We can solve that problem.
All right. Okay, waste management.
Low and,
I think you missed housing.
Did I?
Right, housing, lack of mass transit.
Oh, I did, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, since we'd already started waste management, let's just finish the thought on that, and then we'll get back. So waste management would be low, and you want to characterize that as ongoing? or-
Yeah, it's a weekly thing, so yeah.
Okay, all right. And then, I'm sorry, going back to housing.
If we're talking about the mobile home community, I think it's a medium and could become a high, again, depending on how quickly or if they really start seeing some flooding.
Okay. So medium and ongoing,
Yeah.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, and then finally, cell towers.
Low, I say.
All right, low and ongoing?
Long term.
Long term? All right.
I mean, what's gonna happen when we go to 5G? I mean, that's supposed to be the next technology, and they require more, was it fiber optic lines, as opposed to cell towers, so cell towers might be
So it might be,
obsolete.
it might actually be a mid to long term.
Well, I think it's, with the technology changing as rapidly as it is, low priority, we're kinda at.
Oh,
the
yeah,
first
I
year.
agree with the law, yeah. But it may actually end up being mid-term as opposed to long-term.
All right, so you want to go M here? We don't really have an M, but we can do it if you want.
Sure.
Okay. All right. All right. Infrastructure usually is the longest winded it is. Anyway. Okay. So moving on to environment. First up, we've got pest control. And we had identified last time under flooding, standing water issues, and then under extreme temps, changing set of pests. So do we have action items associated with this one?
Kyla in her notes raise the issue. The easiest way, as somebody pointed out the other day, to solve the pest issue is just bring back DDT and kill everything. And that's not an option. And there are other issues raised by current pest control things. So I don't know how you get around that without, the trade-off, and Kyle and I have talked about this with the mosquito misters. I use mosquito misters, did a survey this year. Yeah, it does kill beneficial insects in a short term for a low amount. Kyla claims it doesn't work. I claim it does because I don't get mosquito bites when I'm in my yard. Lots of people use mosquito misters in town, and you're not going to get them to not use them. So I think there's a trade-off between the environmental issues and the public safety issue.
Is there an education component?
That's the only thing you can do.
Yeah, I guess it has to be education, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as you said, some of the new filings and permittings and conservation, we are making that a part of the order of conditions of certain projects to stay organic, and making an ongoing condition.
Are there organic mosquito misters?
Well, there are plants
Never
you
looked
can
at it.
plant that will repel mosquitoes but you have to they have to be set up properly. Citron works, but it only works if it sets up a barrier, so you have to light your citron ahead of, a few hours before the mosquitoes come out.
See, I just want to feed my chickens without getting attacked by mosquitoes.
Well, I understand it, but there's a trade-off.
It's not a party issue.
There's a trade-off.
I want to go to the mailbox without getting attacked by mosquitoes.
That's called insect repellent that you put on, and I
Which,
mean,
by the way,
that's
has
the trait.
negative effects as well.
But to you and not everybody at large, and I use there's a trade-off. Everything is a trade-off, so you're either potentially killing beneficial insects like bees that pollinate, or you are 100% protected, and I think it's an education issue. I think you're right. People aren't going to stop spraying unless the mandate comes down from above, and doesn't seem to be the way this country wants to go, and may not be the right way. But there's a trade-off. So what you do is you educate people on alternatives to that, and then people will do or not as they wish.
In conversations I've had in the last week with my friends who are mostly troglodytes, they're surprisingly willing to consider control on pesticides because they see it as a water quality issue. They buy into what Kyla is saying, that these pesticides are going into our water supply and causing a problem. Maybe it's time we do this.
Yeah, more evidence comes out every day that they're very persistent.
Is there anything that we can do with zoning bylaws to limit things on site that are capable of holding standing water, things like that?
We can certainly look into that. Michael referenced things that the Conservation Commission's doing in one of them, and I happened to read a recent order of conditions, is a better lawn management program that is less reliant on insecticide, pesticides, pesticide application and heavy fertilization, and actually will result in a better lawn because you're watering it on a different schedule, and that's actually more environmentally friendly. So the short answer is yes. That can be explored, and that may be one of the things, is looking at policies that can be implemented.
So here's the other issue, and I want to tread carefully because I don't think anybody should be banned from being on a commission or anything like this. But if we're going to have a larger education component and our Conservation Commission really gets stuck with a ton of development issues and wetlands issues and things like that, how do we promote that education issue? Do we need a green committee that would do a lot more education.
that one?
Yeah.
That is something we're talking about. We just started meeting. I think we've had 3 meetings so far in the last couple of years. So, yeah, the education aspect of it. I mean, I think pests also include ticks, I would assume, correct?
Yes.
So, you know, telling people what is safer to use, absolutely.
All right, so sounds like we've got education and some discussion of policy. Does that pretty much capture the sense of the group? All right. All right. Waterways, we had identified problems with accumulated debris, vegetation overgrowth, fertilizer and pesticides, and we had flagged that both under the flood drought cycle heading and under extreme storms. So, action items associated with this one.
Again, I think the Conservation Commission has talked about doing this. There needs to be an assessment of the most impacted water bodies. We talked about some of the ponds that are eutrophying, but some of that eutrophication actually may be an effect of the runoff, stormwater runoff, lawn runoff, where this comes into the education issue too, where they're you know, using heavy fertilizers that are flowing into the stream bodies and encouraging algae growth. So that could be a first start, and then trying to identify what the point sources are that are affecting those water bodies, and it can be stormwater, untreated stormwater that's entering, or stormwater that's carrying a high levels of phosphorus and nutrients, and then you know, lawn runoff, those type of things.
Well, the issues all kind of tie in, you know, together. The recent example would be Bay Road with the culvert not operating correctly, and Greg and his crew came down and did a great job, but looked at it, and we had talked about the culvert maintenance and you know, homes being built where they were, you know, causing the water then was in one area, went to the other, overwhelmed the culvert, you know, so it's coming over Bay Road, creating a public hazard, but also into the gentleman's backyard if you're coming from Five Corners, and I forget the gentleman on the right, he had the iron fence in his yard, his shed was getting flooded, his whole driveway, that house that sits on the right before the old original sawmill culvert, and behind his house was a tremendous, I call it, you know, mosquito hotel, big thing. But if we were to get in and clean, you know, up towards some of the headwaters and clean, you know, some of these waterways out, the water would flow. You would get rid of the mosquitoes, you get rid of the debris, you get rid of the eutrophication, you know, kind of all, you know, sort of ties in together. But to that point, as an action item, yeah, we have tremendous assets in the town, as we've seen, you know, with the Boy Scouts recently, you know, making walks and making kiosks, making our conservation land more accessible to the public. And this is a project that I envision that something that they could do in conjunction with us, and bring in some outside assets who have been working with the Scouts in the past. Mr. Chase, who's here present today, Kyla, she wrote some letters, and get some of these, if you were to clean the areas up and the water ran more freer, and the culverts were cleaned, you know, one and another and another and another, you know, it's quite a cumulative effect, I think. And I think it's a low cost, where you have, again, you have local groups and local assets that can do that labor, but, you know, some we need to look at.
It was done at one time. The Scouts, at one time used to maintain from Wheaton up to South Street.
Right.
And they used to hike it, they used to go in and cut whatever was falling and keep that area moving.
Well, a lot of people did. A lot of people would take wood for firewood purposes, or again to the, and I apologize if he's out there listening. I can't remember the gentleman's name, the homeowner. I believe it was Tony. He didn't want to move anything in his backyard because he was afraid, you know, that he would be breaking a bylaw. He was, you know, just didn't want to touch anything, and yet he's got this whole backed up, you know, kind of wet area.
I think Mike hit on two things. you know, waterways and keeping them clean and flowing. As a result, you're right, if you have flowing water, you're going to reduce the mosquito population in that area. Another, I just want to jump back to pest control for a minute, because another way to manage that pest problem is to increase your buffers to the areas that are more attractive. So, you know, again, your wetland buffers help with the mosquito control, because if you have a wetland area where there's a lot of standing water, the greater the buffer, presumably, there'll be less mosquitoes. So, yeah, buffers are an important.
All right, so just to get this one on waterways, it sounds like we've talked about education, we've talked about analysis, and we've talked about implementation. You guys comfortable with all
that
three?
analysis piece, one of the problems with our water department is that they're mandated to test for certain things, but not for minute amounts of chemicals, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe expanded,
Like PCPs per
yeah,
se.
maybe expanded testing is something that we want to consider at some point. Because we clearly have clean water, but it's not perhaps as clean as it could be.
All right, so I've got education, analysis and testing, and implementation. So a lot of action items on this one. All right, so item 3 is forests, and we had identified perhaps declining forest health associated with extreme storms and due to changing climate conditions. Actually, I think that had been a blanket set of statements, I think, across the board for climate impacts. So any implementation items here?
I'd like to get another study of the town forest for a number of reasons. You know, is there a California, not to panic anybody, is there a California situation building out there? You know, what is the assessment of that? And
Well, it's both town forest, it's Wheaton.
we identified, right.
We have forestry plans for both of them
Yeah.
that nobody's ever bothered to implement.
It sounds like they're dated, though.
No.
They're not dated.
The one for Wheaton Farm is dated, the one for the town forest or the Clifford Grant is only, what, 4 or 5 years old?
Up to about 5 or 6 now.
Yeah, yeah.
So is it the sense of the group that it's more of an implementation challenge rather than a planning
Yeah,
challenge?
it's absolutely
Yes,
an
it is
implementation.
an implementation. Yes.
So what could move that along?
Well, ongoing reference to the plan and a decision to take action or not, which is what was happening, at least with the town forest grant, plan. And then, decisions actively reviewing on an annual basis and a
There is a
decision
fire.
to act or not act.
Wheaton Farm more than the other one.
Okay, so annual review of
And with decision
implementation
to act or not act, based,
Okay.
yes. And there are reasons why each year portions of at least the town forest was not enacted and
We keep saying more Boy Scouts. What the hell are those Girl Scouts doing? Can't they get out and do some trees too?
Yeah, you know, that's a good point, actually.
Because we can't put all these things onto the Boy Scouts because there's not enough of them. Just as there's not enough people on the highway department to do this.
There's a big group of mountain bikers too that do a lot.
Yeah, and for the one by the high school, the cross-country team goes out there once as well.
Great. All right, so I captured this one as annual review and implementation of your existing forest management plan. All right, so conserve plans, we had identified maintenance issues and the need for some enhanced open space planning. So, action items here.
3 and 4 are kind of the same thing, I think. Not all of our forest is conserved land, but 38% of the town is conserved land, and most of that is forest.
Right.
Looks like that's also a part of the strength.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. We do consider that to be a strength.
So does what we flagged up here under forest, does that get us home on that one, or is there something in
Yeah.
addition?
Well, and I think it's, a high-level strategic plan was developed many years ago overall for the management areas, which is where the forest plan came for the town forest. There needs to be an action plan developed for management of the lands.
You raised last week the issue of the parts of conserved lands that aren't forest, and whether they should be used for agriculture, or someone suggested this week that some of that land could also be used for solar fields, because solar fields have a limited lifespan and can be removed, so it's a way of also banking land. So maybe we need to, on the conserved lands, maybe we could address the unforested.
Well, it sounds to me like you had mentioned action plan. It sounds like there are a number of issues here. Could that all be tucked in?
There really needs
action
to be
plan?
yes.
Okay, all right.
Can CPA funds be used to help manage
We can't use CPA funds for maintenance, but we could use it for rehabilitation.
That's right.
It's a slippery slope that we can take advantage of.
So if you looked at your fire lanes, it's rehabilitation.
Yes.
And a couple of those bridgeways and stuff.
All right. So under conserved lands, then I captured that as development of an action plan. Moving on to air quality. Last time we had flagged concerns with declining air quality under the extreme temperature category. So any action items on that one?
I think that's where, again, continue to look at ways to reduce the carbon emissions in town. And I'm sorry, are you from the Green Communities?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a Green Communities Committee that was formed under the state's mandate to look at that from town operations perspective. And those are things that, again, that's an education, public, encouraging public transit, bringing public transit in helps that. So there is many things that could fall under that, but I think that's the primary, explore additional
reductions, does that capture it?
Yeah. Yeah, explore additional opportunities for carbon emission reductions.
For forestry. At the same time, you turn around and have the CPA money for the maintenance.
And that would be at the local level, so again, Kyla talked about encouraging people to turn off their lights at night and those type of things. That's more of a broader regional.
It's acquisition for
locally,
recreation.
it has to do with, like leaf blowers and.
There's certain things you can do.
Okay, so moving on to water quality and supply, and last time we had identified that as a strength and no real issues, so anything to be done there?
Just for expand testing.
Good with that?
And I just think that's an ongoing issue. As it gets hotter, we have more drugs. I know that the town feels very strongly that they have an adequate water supply. It will last forever. We don't know that.
If you look at the figures, and I did this once, there are days in the summer when our water use and the amount that we're pumping gets very, very close. So we don't have that water supply. And that may get back to a thing that Kyla mentioned, which is lawn watering. And,
Yes.
it would be nice, number one, to enforce our voluntary ban. But I think maybe the way to go about that would be to monitor the automatic watering systems. If a guy wants to stand out in his front lawn with his hose, I think, you can probably allow that. But those automatic watering systems water when it's completely unnecessary.
It's raining.
Yeah, when it's raining, yeah, there you go. So maybe that's something that we could look into.
Okay, so
That's-
expand testing and perhaps investigation of demand management,
Or-
does that capture it?
Yes, yes.
So the Westport area has done huge work with a company called Well to put sensors on private and municipal wells to develop a whole underlaying visual of the water table, and they're able to watch that minute by minute, hour by hour in Westport now.
And that's a good point, Todd, because there, people, there may be, I don't know how many wells there are, private wells in Easton that people may be using just to water their lawns. And they're thinking they're not drawing from the public water supply, but they are drawing from the aquifer. So that water is being drawn down one way or another.
And that's where Westport and that area really looked at that, was how many straws are in the cup of water, and utilizing that as a value though to get this data from the private homeowners and saying, hey, we're going to put this thing on it. It's going to show you what your actual water is, but overall the community will know really much more in depth of what's in that cup.
And I think that lawn management program is a great thing to share with people too, because generally they're actually not helping create a healthier lawn by watering every day.
But just get some of the landscaper trucks off the side of the road so you could drive down the street.
Yeah, that's a whole issue, the landscape issue. Heavy pesticide use, water use,
Yes.
herbicide use, it's not good.
So Bellingham is doing mandatory backflow checks now on any residential house. And they did it for two purposes. One was to try to figure out how many people are running irrigation systems in town. And they go out every year before your system gets turned on. They go out and do a pressure check on the backflow. But their reasoning in it was really more on the lines of figuring out how many other people are surface watering. And I don't know if there's any real numbers in town of what that potentially is.
Bridgewater does it too.
Revenue source and information.
And they charge,
Yeah.
70, I don't know what a house is, I know a business, we pay 75 per commercial line.
Something we could look into.
Okay, and finally, we had flagged education in regards to storm response. So what is the implementation of the educational effort here?
You get community access TV. You have your Easton channel, which has a ton of stuff on it, a ton of information.
I think the issue here was this about making sure people, like educating them on evacuation and
Evacuation, plowing.
planning and
Because we spoke how the town
get
and
out
social
when
media
they're
is
told,
doing
if they're told to get out.
tremendous job over years, Pat's.
So
Just
if
better and
we
better and better.
put a flyer in the water bill or the tax bill, everybody could tack it up on the refrigerator and that would be taken care of.
Like, wasn't the big communication, like, it was one of you two, it said, not so much, the social media presence is much better and the information dissemination is much better, but how to get to those people who aren't on
Right.
social media.
Right.
And we have done that in the past, is if we have information that we have to push out, we do put it in. And one of the things we worry about is fatigue, is, it's another
Right.
letter from the town, and,
It's like your email inbox.
Yeah.
Well, you know how the White House just did that automatic push of for emergency messages on your phone?
Yep.
I mean, this is something you definitely could not abuse because people would go bananas. But is there a way, if there was a real emergency, to push it through? Like I get a school message comes automatic.
You have to sign up for it.
You have to sign up for auto dial.
But again.
Well, we didn't sign up for the.
Well, that's a little
That's
different.
because you're.
Just have it be an opt-out in like the tax bill, and then if you don't opt out, no one will read it, so then they're
Right,
fixed.
yeah, there you go.
But if people don't have a cell phone.
Well, with the
It works on
They
the
may be the
website.
most
Yeah.
vulnerable.
It pushes-
That's true. But my mom has a cell phone and she's so tech
One of the things that I've
Ed
seen
Hands
work-
has a cell phone.
Now, I have a cell phone and I don't often use it, but.
Yeah, but
The
It's
messaging,
your iPad.
the messaging system actually came through my landline the last time we had school.
Oh, okay,
Right.
yeah.
We can,
Okay,
through,
through the landline.
through the sheriff, we can
Yeah.
dial home phones, and then if you want to opt in on your cell phone, you can. But getting information out, how people sign up would be a good.
Okay, so it sounds like some work to be done on how should I mean, it's more than just reverse 911, how, just on communications.
Yeah,
Communication.
multifaceted.
Okay, all right. All right. Okay, so we need to go through the same ranking exercise here, so back up to pest control, high, medium, or low.
Depends on which way you look at it. You know, the education part of it should be a high. You know, if you're looking at education, but it's more than mosquitoes. It's invasive. It's all sorts of different things.
Yeah, I think it's high because you're absolutely right. There's invasive species to talk about. There's ticks. There's, you know.
Okay.
So,
Airborne diseases, avian flu.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we're going high on that one.
Poisonous
and-
snakes that could be moving up and other insects that.
Yeah, poisonous snakes, absolutely.
There's so many new insects like every
Yeah.
year. I've never seen before.
Sounds like ongoing.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, waterways, high, medium, or low?
Well, it's pretty high if you're getting
I
flooded.
think it's high
Everything
because,
else.
yeah.
We've rated everything in the infrastructure related to water high, so I think it should be
Right.
high.
All right, and ongoing, correct?
Yes.
Forest?
I'd argue for high simply because of your issue that, you know, there is a fire potential there.
There's a heck of a fire load out in those woods.
Yeah.
And ongoing?
Yes.
All right, conserve lands?
Look at me on that one.
Well, it's kind of agricultural.
As we look at the change of the profile of town, we're also looking at other avenues of agriculture.
Like roof gardens and things.
Yeah, in smaller scale.
Yeah.
You know, I think it's more of a medium and it's an ongoing because I think Easton has a really good, strong amount of conservation land and open land and everything else. It's now just more of, you know.
Using it correctly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Medium ongoing? Sound good?
Or long-term, like you're making a long-term plan to.
Yeah, there you
to how
go, a
to manage
long-term
that.
plan, that would be good.
Okay, medium, long-term. Air quality?
I'd say medium.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody good with ongoing? Yeah. All right. Water quality and water supply?
Yeah, I think that's high, just because we all drink the water. And, you know, if our water quality, water supply goes bad, or if we need to switch over to salinization, these are gonna be major issues. Desalinization, excuse me. I'd argue for high and ongoing. Even though it's a strength, but we wanna keep it a strength.
Okay, anybody else? Good with that? All right, going on. And ongoing? Sure. All right, and then finally, on to education.
It's important for everything that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
High, ongoing.
All right.
That's gonna be the low dollar, every community can get that grant,
Right.
but, hey, whatever.
But they improve.
Yeah, so he's gonna,
It's also developing that and having other facets in town help push that.
Yeah, or if you happen to get a format.
Hey, look,
that's more
education's
successful,
there
then
too.
you can-
We've already done that
We're
one.
educating it.
All righty, then finally, moving on to social issues. First thing we had flagged is evacuation plan, identified that as a strength, good system in place with some improvement needed. So what does that improvement entail?
The stuff we discussed on page 1 and 2.
Education.
Education, but also improving the
Where they're going
evacuation
to.
place, making sure everybody knows about that from the last page.
So education captures it?
Yeah.
Education and stuff on page 1 and 2.
Yeah, and page 1 and 2. You want to show people page 1 and 2.
Okay, item 2 was elderly and mobility challenges. And we had flagged that as a vulnerability with transportation/evacuation. So action items there.
Chief, you talked about having a list of people that are at risk if the power goes off. Do we have a plan to evacuate those folks to any
The
place?
ones we know of, we do reach out to them usually during storms, the ones that need generators. I reach out to the nursing homes through the Council on Aging. Both Kathy and Kristen and Mark are on the emergency group, so they identify anybody that may need help. But we could need some way to get a better list of who the vulnerable population is in the community.
All right.
I think that also adds in the equipment that's potentially needed for that.
So assess the equipment needs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because if you get in a situation where you have to move 50 people, granted, we have the ability for mutual aid, but internally, are we even adequate?
Right, you need like that. Yeah, that one spot I'm thinking of, that person, you need a moving crew. You'd tie up half the fire personnel on a shift.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of equipment that they need.
All right, so the second component here is to assess equipment needs, is that?
Yes.
That captures it?
Thanks, you too.
All right, we good on that one? Anything else? Good, all right. Item 3, mobile home park. And we've already talked about this to some extent, but we had identified it being in an area that is vulnerable to flooding. So I think maybe we've already addressed this.
Yeah.
Yep. All right.
From page 1.
Item 4, mental health, and we had identified that as a vulnerability and some increasing challenges associated with storms. And if I remember right, you put this one on the table as just being sort of the stress and strain associated with those issues, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Right, and the pluses, the benefits that you get from having the trees and nature and things like that, rather than a concrete jungle.
Right, so do we have?
So, well, and this was under societal, so I think
Yes.
I had it under environmental as well, but we didn't cover it there. I mean, again, that's, and so the action item, ensuring that there are natural spaces people can relax to or recreate in, but also, just keeping an eye on people. How do you kind of assess if there's a growing mass of people who are severely depressed as a result of.
We didn't put recreation in there, and that's also a spot to put in recreation. So we were talking about recreation planning for different age groups.
Okay, so it sounds like access to open space, recreation, those things are sort of linked.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe what it is just understanding that people do at times call the public offices asking for assistance or where they can go for help. So knowing where to direct people if they're feeling stressed as a result of the changes.
Okay, how will we capture that? Access to services? Is that-
Yeah.
Yes, access to support network.
Yeah.
Okay.
Call the folks in the Merrimack Valley.
Yeah, exactly.
They must have a
Yeah,
plan
that's
by
what
now.
we would do. Or not, just stressing people out even more.
Bless you.
Thank you.
All righty. Okay, identification of population that is oxygen dependent or has other medical needs, and vulnerability. We hadn't called out any specific items in the different categories here. And we've already touched on this to some extent
Yes.
in discussion.
I
Are we
would just
good?
connect those.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Connect them.
emergency.
Yeah, to number 1 up above, evacuation plans, that's sort of
Right.
same thing.
Okay, all right. Communications, we've already talked about that a bit. It was flagged as a vulnerability and emergency coordination under storms. Anything else to add on that one? Already captured it in the previous discussion.
Right.
Yep, good, all right. Community planning, we had not really written a whole lot of detail there. I think that was a pretty wide-ranging discussion, if I remember right.
I don't recall what that specifically was. Did we talk about climate migration, you know, the potential, and that might be
I
another
think that was
housing?
one of the topics that
I
came
mean, that's a
up
lot
under
of
this,
issues,
yeah.
that kind of would be.
We
for
did,
community
that was
planning.
when Ed talked about building the wall.
Yes.
About keeping all the people, about keeping the people from Falmouth out.
Yeah, it was
He didn't want those
capping
kids,
growth.
he
I
said,
want to make that clear.
he didn't want the people from Falmouth in that area.
While a wall would be wonderful, and Brockton should pay for it.
Brockton's not coming to Easton, they're not gonna be, you know, flooded out.
What I was trying to say is that one thing that we don't plan very well for is the, you know, houses pop up like mushrooms in town based on the economy. But the planning for the infrastructure, for the increased population, that doesn't happen as well. For instance, Avalon we were sold on Avalon because it would have a limited impact on the school system. I was talking to people that are at the center school, and that isn't true. It's had a high impact, and an
We've been getting statistics on a regular basis.
yeah,
and
but
that's not borne out,
it's not that's the superintendent's argument. Oh,
Are you getting up?
only two more
That's
kids
sad.
came to the
So-
school. It's the amount of services that the kids are
Yeah.
requiring.
It's
And
traffic.
It seems to be a higher percentage of kids with special needs, which makes sense. If you could move to a town that has an excellent special needs program without purchasing a home and coming there, you might want to move to Avalon.
Do you know what the average rent is there? The
I
monthly rent is
understand, but
pretty
it's
high.
less than buying a McMansion here in town.
Well, that's true,
Yeah.
that's very true.
And police and fire, there's impact on both of us.
Well, you.
Yeah.
Up there, a lot more than what they said.
Yeah.
we were gonna be
Right.
up there.
Daily.
But that traffic impact on the environmental side from that development is huge as well. You know, traffic on 106 is,
They can't imagine when they go to
Doubled.
put that sewer pipe in, that's just gonna be,
Yeah.
you just
Right.
cut.
well, now, then you gotta push that traffic where? Right on the street.
Yeah.
You can't push it into Norton because they got their own thing.
Right.
I don't know.
So it's a
They
planning
gotta get
issue,
through
it's not a
that,
build a
yes.
wall issue.
Right,
So,
right,
it
I
sounds,
would agree.
I mean, it sounds like maybe the common theme here is improved planning for future growth.
Well,
Does that capture it?
plan for the potential impact
Right.
of
Yeah.
Across the
migration.
board.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing I think that came up
Which
last.
is, housing, infrastructure,
Right.
services.
Yeah. The other thing that came up last week was that when we did the open space plan, we purposely didn't spend a lot of time on climate change. And perhaps there's a need for a revision after this
And
report.
a supplement.
Yeah, supplement,
Yeah.
thank you.
That's a good point, Ed, and you brought up, and we do need to reconvene on the master plan, but maybe a supplement to the master plan as well.
Yes, sure.
Is the master plan in Vision Easton?
Yes.
Yes.
Same thing?
I beat him up about his wall, but Ed's point last week, which I thought was in fact a very salient point, is at some point we have to accept that, these developers and builders, they are crafty. They'll find a way to build on that, and that's fine. But at some point, we're gonna have all the people that we can have. That's it. It's a finite number. It just is.
You can build
Well,
a
that's-
7-story building on there.
That's part of the community planning, though, is really.
But to his
assessing
point was, he
how-
was.
That's up to the community to say, we don't want, not that you don't want additional development, but how substandard areas are you going to develop in and allow development in?
And the other issue, it relates to our tax base.
And when I say substandard, I mean from, land.
Yes, from a land use. But the other issue is, the last piece that I read on houses is that building single-family residences is a net tax loss for towns. It's a benefit for the state overall, but not for the town. We need to find a way to make sure that we balance residential construction with increased business and commercial.
Right, yeah.
And which is kind of what the ongoing plan for 138 is.
Right.
So, but we need to make sure that occurs, otherwise our tax base is going to get so skewed that we won't be able to hire those 5 extra guys to take care of the culverts.
We'll be in line first, please.
All right, so I've captured this one as improved planning for future growth and climate migration. Does this get as specific as an update to your master plan or your comprehensive plan? Is that the right vehicle here?
Yes.
Why not?
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the master plan, which is the comprehensive plan, but also the open space plan.
Okay, so, all right, so flag both of those?
And it would, as supplement too. I like the idea of a supplement.
Right. And from our perspective on CPA, we should kind of look at this, because we haven't, 15 years ago when that got started, we had this idea of where we wanted to go with CPA, but we haven't looked at the big picture for a long time.
That's a good point. Again, update the CPA plan.
No, it should be, because not just me personally, but you can see it in various online forums and different, social media platforms that a lot of people don't know. Again, it's education. They don't know, so they ask, hey, can CPA money be used for this? Or they maybe they hear a comment from police or fire or DPW, hey, we could use 5 guys for this, and why can't we use CPA money? There is still a tremendous lack of knowledge out there of what it can and can't.
Right, because we've got so many new people.
Right, now, is that something that you put into the school or the local TV channel, the taxes? I don't know, I don't have an answer for that, but I do know that we do need to get that information out in a better way.
Just to throw in a thing for the CPA, we do a really good job with talking about how we spend our money. Much better than the state government does, because they're far away. It would behoove the state to rethink CPA and perhaps add a category or 2, plus the money that we deserve to have, so that more planning can be done locally, so that what always seems to come down from the state is a homogenized plan for all 351 cities and towns. And by the way, we'll just slant it a little bit too much for Boston. And CPA allows towns a whole bunch of local options, and it's worked out incredibly well.
So I missed the very first part of what you were
We
saying.
should-
What is the suggestion?
A CPA or CPA-like committee should have more options on where they could spend their money and the funding to go along with it.
So which funding? What funding are you talking about?
I'm saying we can do 3 categories: affordable housing, historic preservation, and conservation.
Right.
Give us another category.
That you choose.
Yeah, perhaps it's planning for climate change or something like that. That each town would be able
Something
to.
related to community preservation.
Absolutely.
Topic.
Yeah.
Which of course
Yes.
planning for
No,
climate change would be.
right, and what Ed's saying is each one of our communities and cities and towns is different than the next one. And, you know, what we want here for us in Easton is different than what the people in Brockton want,
Well, good.
and so forth
So the
and
way
so
to
on.
start that would be to have a discussion with the CPC, and this gets very specific, so have a discussion with the CPC and see if the CPC would like to start a discussion with their local legislators about that type of, and that can be a short term.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
You guys captured that. I'm not going to try to do it.
It's okay, I'm gonna send myself an email so I can add it to the agenda for the next meeting.
Okay, good. That's the February 7th.
As I'm sending an email,
I'd
to
say,
keep asking you for some data.
Okay. All right. Okay, then our final line on this one was, once again, education. Have we already talked education through thoroughly, or something else to add here?
I think it was really pushing that everything that we've talked about needs that education component.
Okay, so all of the above on this
Right,
page?
right. And I think it's all 3 pages. It's the education to the general public about where we are at, where we're going, and why.
say repeat the education horse, but you don't want to say that.
No. I can't bring bacon on my nose.
Eric, you're doing education right now?
Sorry about that.
Repeat the dead horse.
This conversation over the last 2 weeks has been really good because it's a bunch of people that don't normally get together. We've talked about a lot of issues, and we need to get this information out to everybody in town when the final report comes out. And roll it
That
up
is
and
part of the
just let 'em on the nose
process,
with
is
it.
the, they call it the listening sessions, so that will be next stages. And I'm gonna jump in, because Andrea, works in the planning department, has spearheaded this for us. She applied for the grant, and she has organized all of this, worked with Bill Napolitano and Serped to arrange this. We were thrilled to see how many people came to participate in the breadth. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been a great mix.
Yeah, and it is.
Yeah. Alrighty, so we need to go through the ranking on this page, and then we need to revisit the whole shooting match and think about what our absolute highest priorities are across the board. First, we need
Eric,
go
do you
through
want to
this.
go through pets and livestock first?
Oh, did I miss
Yeah,
one?
that's right.
Oh,
Yes,
I
you did.
Yes, I'm sorry about that. Okay, we had flagged pet shelters and livestock transport as a vulnerability. We did not get into any specifics on that we noted down, but thoughts on implementation on that.
Well, we can tie that all back into that implementation, the evacuation plan. Because that's where it came from. We were
It's a
talking.
component of the
Right,
evacuation
yeah,
plan?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Sorry.
Great.
We want to have our cows at the shelter.
So you can have milk.
Yes.
Right.
And
And
then when
I
you
got
run
my
out of
chickens.
milk, you get really desperate, you can.
Right.
Barbecue.
I'm not noting that down. You guys are on your own on that. Okay.
But what if the guy with the nebulizer is allergic to a goat?
Maybe we can use you guys for the pill
Okay. Going back up to evacuation plan, priority on that one, high, medium, or low?
Well, we view it as a strength,
Yep.
but it's very important. So how do you want to categorize that?
you want to keep it at that strength.
Yeah.
So it would be in my.
I think
my
it's a
views,
high priority.
It would be high.
Particularly for this page, yeah.
Okay. And sounds like it's probably ongoing, right?
Yeah.
All right. Item 2, the elderly and the mobility challenges that we discussed.
I think that's high.
That's really a twofold thing. One of it ties back to the evacuation plan.
Right.
And then the other thing goes back to the previous page when we talk about public transportation. And we rated public transportation as medium, but how,
Yeah.
No, I thought we rated it as low.
Low.
low? Okay.
I thought this tied in more to Stephanie's point of, you know, like, this is life or limb, this isn't having power TV, you know, in
Right.
case
Yeah,
of a storm.
yeah. So if
you
you
know,
tie
or
it to the
child, this
evacuation
is,
plan,
you know,
then it's high.
Yeah, you got
Okay.
a vulnerable population's gotta take priority.
All right. And ongoing.
Yes.
yes.
All right. Okay, item 3, the mobile home park. We identified possible flooding vulnerability.
Medium.
Topic there.
Yeah.
Good.
Didn't we do
This
that on
time,
another
so we
page?
said-
Yeah, we've covered it a couple times in different aspects.
All right, and is
Can you,
also
oh, I'm
ongoing.
sorry. Can you speak to that, Dottie? I know there's been lots of different things going on there. Is that, you know, about the park, is it staying? Is it going? Is the ownership changing? Or can you not say? Or about the
Mobile park.
The mobile park.
Oh, it's in process. The park owners want to close it. There's a process to close it that they haven't followed. So nothing is happening with it right now. The town is trying to advocate for receivership
Yep.
for the park. And that would mean that somebody independent would be come in to take over, collecting the money and getting the repairs done that need to be. And then at the end, this is one model of the receivership, they would turn it back over to the park owners. But these park owners are trying to close all their parks in the state. You know, so we're trying to just make sure that the people there, whatever happens, that
Right, they're
it's
gonna
safe
take
place.
care of. Yeah, that was kind of, I didn't know if it was going away, you know, in terms of this, you know, tying it
We have
in.
a multi-pronged approach on that, so.
So would you consider, Dottie, this as an ongoing process, long-term or short-term?
Long term.
Because there will be an end.
Right, well, that's kind of.
Yeah, that was.
That's
right.
kind of why I was
That
asking that question.
That's why I asked, yeah.
All righty. Item number 4, the mental health issues that we had talked about.
You know, we labeled that mental health, but we talked at the end about changing that to quality of life. And if you take it as quality of life, what makes Easton a nice place to be, I'd say that that's a high priority and ongoing.
Okay, are you good with making it mental health / quality of life?
Sure,
Because we
yeah,
did
absolutely, yeah.
flag access to support network, which
Yes.
is a little bit more than mental health.
Yeah.
So, okay, all right. All right, and how do we want to rank that one?
That's one that I think people always say, oh, yeah, low priority, low priority. I think it's a high priority. It's what makes our town unique. If you look at surveys about us, that's why people come to Easton. It's, you know, so I think it's a high priority. We want to maintain that.
Sense of the group?
I'm trying to think in terms of action items. I feel like we want to maintain it, but is there a lot to do?
Yeah, it goes
Right
back
now?
to the previous page where you have to manage the town forest and
Okay.
all of that sort of stuff. And,
So we're good with high?
yeah, and the green infrastructure and new housing developments and
Okay.
that kind of stuff.
All right, and is this ongoing?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, item 5, identification of populations that are dependent on oxygen or have other specific medical needs. Vulnerability, how do we rank that?
Aye.
Aye?
Goes back to the evacuation plan.
Okay.
But that should be a short term.
And a life and limb issue.
Right.
Yes.
And that short term?
Short term, sure.
Okay. All righty. Item 6 is communications. Flag is vulnerability and emergency coordination.
I would say it's a high because it goes back to life and limb. But I think it could be a shorter or long-term plan. You would know better on that code as far
Say
as
high and long-term.
Yeah.
All right. Item 7, community planning. Have a pretty long list of implementation items there, including master plan, open space plan,
Yeah.
CPA.
Planning's always important, right? Otherwise, we all wouldn't be here.
Well, I think so. I think it's a high, and that can be, that could be a short term. I mean, we
Right.
should be doing.
Yeah, those are all things
Right.
that can be completed. I mean, they're obviously ongoing because you do something every 5 years.
Right, but actually
we
doing
can
a
we can solve
supplement.
these problems. Yep.
right.
And this is a good feeder.
All right, and then item 8, the pet shelter / transport.
That went back up to evacuation plan.
Yeah, that would ever go into evacuation plan. It should be high priority because a barbecue is also. There we go. It could,
You're
evacuation.
going to be really shocked when you get your plan back and it's barbecue.
Ed's gonna be shocked when we leave him and we get the chickens. Take him to grab his chickens. Hey, we can get omelets and soup.
We're talking
Some
high
drumsticks.
priority here.
Yeah.
Okay, and is this
Because it ties to the evacuation plan, that's why.
short term?
Yeah, we don't have one, we need to make a plan for that.
And then finally, education, and we had written applicable to all of the above.
Right. Whatever we said on the last page.
Yeah.
Hi.
High and ongoing.
Can you see the cows grazing the artificial turf at the high school?
Okay, all right. Well, we've got about 8 minutes to wrap up here, and our final task is overarching ranking on this. So why don't we try to flag perhaps the top 2 items on each page, and we can do a little horse trading between pages if we need to. But since we're already here, why don't we start on this one? What are your thoughts on top 2 highest priorities?
So education would be one of them, because
Yeah.
it's on every
It's on
page.
every one of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would say your evacuation, because that covers a lot of those as well.
Yeah,
'Cause
I'd say evacuation.
Your mental health stuff ties back into that. Your care for your elderly ties back into that. You know, so I think those are your 2 right there.
I wouldn't say education, because education comes up on every page. So.
It's like education is a subset.
Yeah, that should be,
Right.
that should
That's
be
a
an
common
overarching for all
denominator,
3.
right.
Yeah, common denominator. So I'd still go back to the quality of life for my
Yeah,
number 2.
and maybe under quality of life, how to make individuals more self-resilient, to be able to
That's really.
Sustainable.
That's a great
sustain
idea.
for, I mean,
Right.
federal government's not coming for 72 hours.
Yeah.
So we have to handle our own stuff for 3 days. So I need you to handle all your stuff for 3 days.
Yeah, it's your water.
Yeah.
How much water do you have at
Yeah.
home comment?
Right.
Okay.
How much drinking water,
Yep.
how much
Call the
non-perishable
police
food you
department,
got.
not the fire department.
One snowstorm we had here,
Yeah.
we were out of fuel. Another day, we would have been completely out of fuel and we couldn't get any. If you remember, Long
Yeah.
Island,
Yeah.
couldn't get fuel. And it was coming to us the next day
Mm-hmm.
because of, everything was so bad in the whole southeast coast, so.
Okay, so then we're gonna pick evacuation plan and our mental health / quality of life, and we can capture in the notes, we're basically including storm preparedness in that category here. the ranking. So,
I think those are really, like when we talk about maybe merging things together, those are 2 really, really
okay,
good.
so back to the environmental page, we've got pest control, waterways, forests, conserved lands, air quality, water quality / supply, and education. What would you pick as your top two on this page?
Water quality
Water.
and supply.
Yeah.
Yeah, water quality and waterways, because
I
waterways.
say waterways.
Yeah,
Water-
well, waterways
waterways.
and water quality, you could squeeze them together in one category, and then we could still pick another one up.
No, that's fair game. I mean, we can collapse categories now.
Yeah.
Well,
That is fair.
I mean,
I think
Bill
it's-
mentioned that last week, and I see where, and I'm kind of expecting that as you collate this, that
It's
might-
gonna be a lot of
yeah,
class.
that will happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
There'll be
mean, that's
blasting, and
typical of
then
these
there'll be
processes.
sub.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, so waterways, but we're basically gonna lump these two together
Right.
as a single priority item. All right.
So that's only one priority item. We get two here on this page.
Yeah, so what are the,
What's the other one?
Well, I thought you were asking me to do this so that you could spend another priority on infrastructure, but you want to
Oh,
spend
yeah?
another priority on this page.
Yeah, we get two per page, you said.
Yeah, okay. Fair enough.
you can't cheat
Or you
that.
can do 3 on infrastructure.
So, what?
Or 3 on infrastructure.
Which might do 3
Oh,
on
we do, we
infrastructure.
pick
Or three on infrastructure. Yeah, no, that's a good point, too.
That's-
Why don't we visit infrastructure?
Yeah,
let's see what happens.
Okay.
Let's go over there and see what happens.
Because the mosquito thing would be handled by waterways.
Right.
Just so we do.
All right.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so.
Oh,
the
basement
way
flooding.
review, We've got basement flooding, what really was discussed as broader flooding issues, dams, culverts, power grid, gas infrastructure, septic systems, stormwater infrastructure, shelter, school, emergency operations center, roads, lack of mass transit, housing, waste management, and cell towers. So your votes for,
If I make a suggestion, is we can fold dams and culverts under stormwater
Yep.
and make
Yeah.
stormwater
One.
Yes.
one priority.
Yes,
Yeah.
which would also fold in basement flooding, because we don't get basement flooding unless we
Yes.
have storms, so.
Right, unless you have flooding, yeah.
so we are, to make sure I'm clear on this, so we're gonna take basement flooding,
Dams.
dams, culverts.
Culverts, and put it under number 7, stormwater
They're all gonna be
infrastructure.
part of stormwater.
Yes.
Okay?
You could call it living in a swamp, that's,
Because it's such a wonderful place to live.
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Well, it's till the wall came.
So the front of our review is going to
And then the wall kept all the water.
a swamp, a
Okay.
mosquito.
Ended up with a hot
So
tub.
that's one. What's, second tier?
I say power grid is mine.
Yeah.
But then you can then we go back to that whole combining. You can take all of your power grid, your gas, and combine it. Utilities.
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 Yeah, utilities, good point.
Yeah.
So power grid and gas become utilities, and
Might as well add cell tower to that. I mean, that's sort of, add that to utility.
you want to?
I think you picked the wrong 2.
Did I? Ah, you are correct. Good catch.
It looks like the Middleborough Rotary now.
Yeah.
All right, we're capturing this in the notes, right? This is difficult to decipher. Okay. All right, and then, okay, do you want to pick one more priority here, or do you want to go back to environment for another priority?
I think we covered all the highs, like
Yeah, we-
combining them.
Yeah.
We're gonna go one short.
All right,
Let's
so
flip
we
it
go
back.
back to environment.
I'm gonna say forest on that one.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
how about forest and conserved lands as
As one unit.
as one unit?
Sure.
Okay. Make sure we got the right ones here.
I'll go up there later today. I've been up there in a while.
All right, so let's review just to make sure that we're all on the same page and we've got this captured in the notes, because this is about the most important part of the whole exercise. Okay, so on the infrastructure page, we are linking basement flooding, dams, and culverts, and folding that all into the stormwater infrastructure category, correct? Alrighty. We are taking power grid and gas infrastructure and combining that as utilities. And do you want to go ahead and include cell tower there?
Yeah, it wouldn't hurt.
Okay. 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 On environment, we have flagged waterways and water quality / water supply as a single category, as a high priority. And we have identified forest and conserved lands as a group. For a second? Yep. Alrighty, and then finally, on the societal page, we have flagged the evacuation plan and mental health / quality of life with the addition of the concept of being resilient and self-sufficient. All right?
Yeah.
Good? Great work. All right, so we're going to come back together as a plenary, and can I have a volunteer for somebody that will report out on our priorities? I'll do it if nobody wants to, but it'd be good to have somebody from the group.
That outside perspective is always so important.
Okay. Whatever. All right. Okay, so take a break, they'll be down here in a minute. So thank you very much, it was a good exercise.
I've only got so much space to write.
Great job, you two. You didn't knock this corner off. That's excellent. Professional, very professional.
My mother has access to their partner. So, like their real. Yeah, thinking because they have access to the financials and kind of have an eye on them. So, they said about their
Well, they're all written.
They are, you know, they're like any project. We've been out with Amherst.
He wasn't when I got there.
I saw Dawn presenting and she was like, I was in Easton and we're going to the Municipal.
Maybe his face was like shit.
What are the odds of that? She's like, yeah, I love
They were.
No, my mother, I was on the way to my mother's. I had just gotten onto 495. Bay Road, and she calls me. Oh, I'm on my way down. I went to yeah. She gave me some very number, her date of birth, her mother's name. No electronic access to any nothing.
Yeah. And he said specific, so it wasn't a account that, because he said he has access to it. That was my only feeling. Good, right, a check for $5. But that would be the max, and he gives me that they ever have. And the things that we're not writing, that's the.
So I called two people. They don't get right.
Well, you guys had 6. It's amazing. People always end up thinking, well, and I think all Last year, you guys are planners. You do a great job. I know.
I worked at MPN, but I worked in Carroll, and my boyfriend planned it out in business.
Yeah, absolutely. We listen to people.
Okay, so we're gonna do our last step, of having each group do a report out of their highest selected priorities. And then we'll see how similar they are or different they are to each other. And we'll have a quick talk about that, and then we can go.
We gotta talk what we're gonna do.
Yeah, talk about our next steps, and then we'll be done.
That's it.
Cool. So anybody want to volunteer to report out first? All right.
All right, look at this, there you go.
Okay, Bill's group, anybody that doesn't hear me say what we need to say, let me know.
You can go over we're over there.
Oh, but we're on different pages.
Well, that's okay, no infrastructure, that's good.
No, okay, so, I'm just gonna speak to our highest priorities. Our, there we go. Okay, so, a couple issues came up in both the environment, infrastructure, and social, and those tended to be our highest priorities. The 305 Turnpike Street is the highest societal priority, and that was because of the need for proper management that's presently ongoing through the Board of Selectmen, and the critical stormwater and septic issues that need improvement. The highest environment is the highest environment. Interestingly enough, the highest environment issue was forest management, and that again, in a similar vein, it was a high priority because it hit different factors. Forest management addresses the fact that we have a lot of conservation lands that can be that can be managed more actively, as well as the advantage of addressing our trees relative to our utility lines. And then the highest, pink means infrastructure, is stormwater management. We have a new MS4 permit. That's the municipal stormwater permit that just got put into the federal program. It has certain requirements that we need to address, and therefore we should look for ways to help fund our stormwater permit. But it also addresses the ability of both the conservation and the planning department to be addressing, through which we do in redevelopment, bring storm and new development. We bring stormwater as a high priority issue to recharge the groundwater and to address water quality. So stormwater, forest management, and 305 Turnpike. Let's make it better.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So we ended up collapsing categories as we went through the final prioritization. So we had talked about flooding issues, dams, and culverts, and we folded all of that into stormwater infrastructure as sort of an umbrella category, and that was our highest priority here. And then we did a very similar thing with the power grid, gas infrastructure, and cell towers, and we linked that up into utilities. So for this page, that's where we ended up in terms of priority. All right, some similar sort of consolidation took place here on the environment page. So we've got waterways up here as number 2, and then water quality / supply. So we ended up collapsing that into a single priority category. And then secondly, forests and forest management, similar to the previous group, and conserved lands. So we felt like there were a lot of overlapping issues there. And then finally, on the societal page, this is the one exception where we didn't do any collapsing of the categories, but we flagged the evacuation plan as a high priority. And this category, actually we did do a little bit of consolidation because this category actually grew as we talked about it. It started off as mental health, we added quality of life, and then towards the end of the discussion, we also included sort of the concept of personal resiliency, or the ability of homeowners to kind of take care of themselves before the cavalry can come in an emergency situation. So all of that got knit together and flagged as a priority. So any questions? Any other comments from our group? Anything that I didn't cover that we should discuss? No? All righty, thank you. You going to close this out, Bill?
All right, thank you all so much, because again, great groups. This is your plan. This is a plan that you put together. Obviously, there's spots that both groups hit in common, and both groups had some different things. So in total, it's going to make for a great, well-rounded, and representative plan for the town of Easton. And it's amazing. You guys, we've done a few of these before. Working in separate groups, totally independently, you've come up with pretty much the same issues. So it shows you know your town. You obviously know who you should be working with, who works together well right now, how we do things, how we can improve even our strengths. What we're going to do right now is we're going to take everything that you've put together for your plan, put it into a planning document, draft it up, send it back to the town to look at, make any corrections, edits, or anything else, or any addition material that comes in that you can think of. In the meantime, please send to Andrea, and she can send to us, and we'll make sure that we get it in. We have appendices that we talked about last week we're going to be putting in. All of this goes into the appendix of your plan. So again, even though you've picked your top issues, priorities for each category, everything that you've listed is fair game for any state grants program, local grants program, private grants program, whatever. It's all there. Once this is all consolidated, we'll send it to the state. The state will certify your plan. In the meantime, you can think about action grants you want to go after. If you have money left over from this process and you want to go after action grants immediately or put that money towards addressing an action item, we can work with you to put together a scope of work, send it in, and plan for the rest of that money, the use of the rest of that money. We'll be having a follow-up listening session in Easton. It can be hosted by one of the boards, could be hosted by the Planning Board, the Conservation Commission, whoever, Board of Selectmen, where we'll come in, we'll do a summary of the plan, what we did, how we did it, what the results were. We're also going to have a regional meeting with representatives from Mansfield, Norton, and Easton at the conclusion of the whole process. Mansfield still has to do theirs. Once they're done, we'll get together and have a regional, and we're going to talk about issues in common and where we can work together regionally, and that will become an addendum to your plan. So that's it. That's the planning process. We'll get that work to you, and hopefully you'll be certified soon, and you'll have some money left over. We'll start working on your priorities.
And I assume that anybody who was willing to take the time to come to these 2 workshops, first let me thank you very much, but also if you'd like, I can send the draft plan out and get your comments and clarifications while the town is doing its review as well.
That's it. You know what? Give yourselves a hand. You guys did a heck of a job. And hopefully for many years in the future, you'll be working with our colleagues from Oak Colony Planning to address the action plan items. Get many grants, prosper, and go in the right direction to address climate change. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of you for the time you gave. It's a lot of work, and I appreciate you giving up your Fridays. It's a big sacrifice. Thank you very much. Go forward.
Thank you. Great job.
Yeah. Okay, good.